people from smoking it on the street at least. I don't know where they should smoke it because I don't want them smoking it in my building either.
Well, it actually is against the law to consume in public in Massachusetts. So I can speak for Ascend, which I used to be the Massachusetts CEO for. We enforce that all the time. I mean, you can't control what people do out on the sidewalk away from your facility, but there's an enforcement you can have out in front of your facility, so people ought not to be smoking it right in front of the facility, especially if there's a glut of shops. But it actually is against the law to consume cannabis in public. So that shouldn't be happening.
I think Sherry's right. You definitely smell it quite a bit in public parks. It's a pungent odor anyway. I often joke that
right. You're never going to not have that smell.
You're not
That's
going to not have that
like.
smell,
right.
But I think you get a sense of people's morning routines. At least I do. As I mentioned often in the show, I'm a big runner. I always run in the mornings, and I can't tell you how many times I run by traffic lights, and I just have the smell of pot coming from people's cars as they're driving to work. So presumably they could have maybe a nicer day, or at least a nicer launch to their day, but that's how their day is definitely getting started. We have a lot of texters, by the way, who are also troubled by just the smell that comes
right.
with it. And this is something that we were talking about earlier on before we started the show, Andrea. This is Mitch from New Bedford writing, the security requirements for pot shops, ridiculous. Has there ever been an incident at a store? They should roll them back. I know that a lot of pot shops have talked about this, just the money
right.
that they have to invest in security measures, which never seem to have materialized as a need for concern.
Well, there was sort of an overweening concern in the beginning. People thought that there were going to be these huge spikes in crime, and that the security requirements in terms of cameras inside the facility, outside the facility are prohibitive. I mean, part of the reason that the equity part eludes the state here and in other places is because of the amount of money that it took and probably still takes to open up any kind of cannabis-related venture, in large part because of the security. I mean, the cultivation that I was involved with, 280 cameras. 280 cameras.
For one facility.
For one facility. And it's a cultivation, so it's very, very large. It's a very, very large building, but that's a lot of cameras. So I think the CCC, the Cannabis Control Commission, will revisit that. But I think, it's at this point in terms of, how people perceive it. And I'm surprised to hear, not really surprised that people smoke it as much as they do, but I would have thought that consuming of edibles would have overtaken smoking, just because if you don't have to smoke, most people want to spare their lungs that. But from what I'm hearing from you and Sherry, people are smoking a big part of it. So.
And before we go back to our calls, do you want to address the equity issue a little bit? And I referenced it in the open too, that people are saying the equity issues that were supposed to be present from the inception of the launch of this industry and here in Massachusetts have not borne out. What was the state supposed to do? What has it done?
Well, part of the issue was it started as medical. It was medical only was legal. And in order for you couldn't get, and you still can't get, well, you can get some bank financing, but no bank would finance you. It wasn't like you could go get a small business loan and open up a medical cannabis shop. So the only people that had the wherewithal to open anything up were the people who had access to private equity funding. That's a discrete group of people. It is largely white and male, right? Almost exclusively, and that's where the money was coming from. Once the medical facilities got up and running, and those were the only dispensaries we had for a while, when they made the shift to recreational and that became legal, the first people in on recreational were the medical people. That's who the regulations had all been written for, and they were actually given a preference. So the people with the money that had sort of non-diverse or non-equity-based operations were the first ones through the door for recreational. And so it was always two steps forward, 3 steps back. Right, yeah. It was catch up, and it never really has caught up. And the price, the cost of opening never really went down. So it's always going to be a struggle. And the longer the industry is in existence and the longer it becomes institutionalized as to who makes money in the industry, the harder it's going to be for equity to get a foothold.
And as we have been mentioning, as you just said, the price of opening has not gone down, but the price of the cannabis itself has gone down,
That's
which
right.
is a problem for businesses.
That's
Let's
right.
go to Leslie in Lincoln. Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi, greetings. I just want to say first off, I've been a cannabis criminal my entire life. I'm 60 years old. I'm super thankful to be able to operate in the daylight instead of hiding all the time. About the retail experience, I don't think that retailers currently can match my neighbor down the road that grows in his basement. And until they can come down to that level, I think there's going to be continued pressure on them to continually lower their prices.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different groups, sort of also, schools of thought, people who adhere to schools of thought in the cannabis industry. And there are people that, really do. They have a local person that they buy from. They may be growing it legally in their basement, and that's the person who supplies them. You can grow pretty good quality stuff, as long as well, some people grow it legally, not everybody does. But that's their benchmark for the kind of quality and the kind of prices. I think that's what Leslie is saying. And then there are others that are sort of new to the product, new to the market, or relatively new, who are going to go to the store to get it, just like you go to the store to get anything else. But people who have a faithful supplier that they trust, that's who they're going to stick with.
We have another texter. This is another thread I'm seeing here, other than people being bothered by the pungent smell. Rachel writes, people are still worried about losing their jobs on drug tests. So you can drink alcohol on the weekends and go to work hungover, but can't have any THC for about 30 days or risk your job, because that is still happening. Of course, we're talking about case to case. There isn't a federal recognition or
Right.
acceptance of cannabis
No
at this
federal
point.
recognition, although employers have gotten sued for, it depends on the employer, it depends on the job, having just the prohibition against having it in your system and it coming up in random drug testing, where there's no evidence of impairment. They're just firing the person or disciplining the person because they've consumed it. And if you're in a state where it is legal, that is a problem, and employers have gotten sued for that. But that's another thing that hasn't caught up, this notion that, yeah, you can have alcohol on your breath, right? Or be hungover from the night before, and you're not in any serious jeopardy of losing your job. There's an inequity there.
Let's go to Seth in Salem. Hi, Seth.
Hi, Seth.
Hi, how you guys doing?
Good.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for taking my call. I believe that the last caller pretty much summed up what my point was, and that is, I think what you're seeing right now is you're seeing these legal cannabis dispensaries that had this enormous bump because it was like this novelty thing that was going on, But the fact of the matter is, people who are growing the stuff guerrilla and have been doing it for years and have had, it's better quality, it's way cheaper, and it's more convenient when somebody's growing in your neighborhood and you know them. It's just you can't compete with that, and I think you're going to see a market correction. The reason why it's happening so quickly is because of this. People have been doing this for forever, even with it not being legal. So.
Well, there is that concern. To your point, Seth, there's a concern that if the regulated market, if there's overproduction in the regulated market, that product is going to find its way into the gray market, basically, right? I don't like the term black market, so I don't use that, but into the gray market, and that is a real risk if there continues to be sort of overproduction, or it stops selling them. It still sells pretty well. It's just the price has gone down. But if sales start to plummet as well, I think that's a real issue, and people will turn more and more to folks that they know who are growing privately.
And as we mentioned, the market correction may be already happening, with stores already closing here in Massachusetts. And we've seen that happen in other places across the country too, like Oregon. I think they were ahead of us in this. So
Right.
We've seen what's happened there, which is the closure and people adjusting to prices falling and business owners not being able to stay in the market. Seth, thank you for the calls. We do have a lot of people who say that they really couldn't live without it, though. It helps with their
Right.
insomnia. And this is not Marjorie writing us right now from her vacation, but this is a lot of people who say that there is a huge value to this, and there's a huge value in knowing that it comes from a regulated industry.
Right. They tell you right on the label. You know exactly what it is that you're getting. We got a text from Joyce Gerber. She hosts a podcast called The Cannabis Show, and she says she highlights stories of women building this new industry. She's starting her 5th season on the show. She has lots of stories on how this amazing plant can benefit women her age and older, who know the least about it, and that she touts the health benefits and the wellness benefits. I mean, it really isn't a remarkable plant. It never should have been scheduled as a Schedule I drug. That was a purely political thing. Never should have been demonized the way it was. And if that hadn't been the case, people would know, I think, a lot better about this plant and be able to explore it a little bit more. But we have to take a quick break, but we're coming back. Stick around. More of your calls and texts are coming up next. You are listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library, and we're streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
I'm Marco Werman. The world is full of stories.
Israel's never before been in a situation remotely like this.
So they put their hopes in China.
We have a massive aging population here in Europe.
When you arrive in Ghana, then you tell yourself, this is where I should be.
It's 1 hour each day when you get a global perspective. Join us on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Support for GBH comes from you and the Peabody Essex Museum, presenting Geo Swaby. Fresh Up, a Bahamian artist creates love letters to Black women through expressive textile-based portraits. Now on view. Tickets at PEM.org. And Comcast Business, committed to providing connectivity for your business by offering cybersecurity, internet, and mobile solutions. Comcast Business, powering possibilities. Restrictions apply. Comcast Business, internet required.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I'm Jared Bowen here with Andrea Cabral. We're in for Jim and Marjorie all week, and we're live today at the Boston Public Library, streaming on youtube.com/GBH News and at facebook.com/GBH News. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the Globe magazine piece by Eric Trickey, begging the question about whether we're headed for a cannabis crash in Massachusetts now that we're 5 years into, I was going to call it the cannabis experiment, but it's not a cannabis experiment because it's basically here to stay. But high fees and dropping prices are making it hard for shops to sustain themselves. So give us a call or text us at 877-301-8970. Again, that's 877-301-8970.
We have a lot of interest, a lot of texts, and a lot of calls. Our lines are actually really full.
And this is way more split than I thought it was going to be. I thought that we had just moved into this realm, that people were happy that it's here, but a lot of people are just sticking with their martinis.
That's right.
Or upset about the smell, or happy that the market is regulating the way it is right now, basically because the prices are coming down.
Right. Let's talk to Neil in Cambridge, see what he has to say.
Hi, Neil.
Hi. Great to hear you all. I always enjoy you. A couple of things quickly. One on my experience, and then one brief comment on the whole equity issue. So I first started smoking in the 60s. I'm 73 years old, and but I stopped during my 30s and 40s, and I've come back more so with it being legalized, primarily because of the quality. And I can, as Andrea mentioned, you can rely on it being high quality. Never knew what was in the pot when I bought it on the gray market. So my experience has been very good as a consumer. I'm a regular consumer of it. I don't need very much to satisfy myself, and so the price is very good. So I have an overall positive experience. I hope soon it will be federally legal. On the equity issue, we've done a lot in Cambridge to further equity owners or prospective owners. Money has always been a big problem. Funding has always been a big issue. We created a moratorium to allow for there to be a development of equity companies without...
I think we lost. That's too bad. We lost Neil, but I can pick up.
He got pretty far into his call.
He did, yeah. And Cambridge did do that. Cambridge did put a 2-year moratorium, so that there was going to be more of an opportunity for equity businesses to get sort of a foothold. And it really is a city by city, town by town thing. In some places, the entire industry is stiff-armed. In some places, they really are not interested in the equitable part of it. And in other, towns like Cambridge, there was very much, I was there for it, very much an active pursuit of trying to put some equity into the business in that city.
Well, one thing that's not region by region, city by city, town by town, is the issue of cannabis cafes. I was filling in on this show when we had Cannabis Commissioner Shannon O'Brien here asking her about that, and she said this is really for the commission to take on now. This was supposed to be part of it, cannabis cafes, to explain it, or basically like bars, just as you would go and saddle up to the bar and have your drink, you would sit down at a cafe and have your edible or whatever. I guess it's probably not smoking since it's not allowed, but that hasn't moved forward.
No, in a cannabis cafe, I assume you would be able to smoke, because it's a private business that, just like you go in and have a drink. Just like we all hoped to do when we were 16 years old, going to Amsterdam for the first time.
Exactly. But I think
and telling our parents that we spent all of our time at the Rijksmuseum, of course.
Of course, because learning history is important.
Right.
But I think that people, part of the issue of public consumption and why you see people flouting the law on public consumption, some of it is because people just want to, but some of it is because they can't. They live in public housing, and it's prohibited because it's not federally allowed. It's prohibited in public housing or wherever they happen to be. Cannabis cafes are supposed to be the answer to that, and they have not gotten off the ground.
Let's go to Mike in Seekonk. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Hi. How are you doing today, guys?
Good.
Fine, thanks.
Okay, a couple of things. I guess the first thing is just a comment. Comment being that, you can walk in. I'm over 65. You can walk into any liquor store in the country at my age and not have to show an ID. Kind of take offense to the fact that when I go into a dispensary, that despite my age and my, I'm not someone who looks a lot younger than my age, that I have to produce an ID. I'd really like to know why that is and why it hasn't been eliminated at this point. So that's just, maybe you can answer that down the road. Now, as far as the, I guess you could say the quality issue, gray market versus non-gray market, kind of shocked to hear that 70% of people still use flour. Don't know why. I mean, the way to go
surprises me too. Yeah.
Explain that for those of us who don't know.
Or vaping, non-distillate type vaping. So I would say that. And then in terms of comparison, like I just heard someone say, I think it was one of you say, the whole aspect of, well, I'll stick to my martinis. To me, it's like those folks obviously have never ingested really high quality cannabis, because you can't even compare the experience.
It's true.
First off, if you drink alcohol, it doesn't matter whether you drink a $10,000 bottle of wine or a 6-pack of Bud. The feeling that you get from it is the same intoxicated feeling.
Well, Mike, thank you for the call. We appreciate it. We hope you get where you're going, by the way. We heard your GPS in the background. By the way, James from Salem, also on the North Shore, is questioning why licenses get scanned. Maybe you can...
That's the regulation. I mean, the adamance around not allowing anybody under 21 inside a store. But the same thing happens if you order alcohol online and it gets delivered even by your grocery store. They will check your ID.
But do they have to? So people are saying it's scanned and recorded in cannabis shops. Is that the case too?
No, it's not. It's not scanned and recorded. It's scanned to make sure that it's a valid license. So the scanners that they use, the handheld ones, have the capacity to make sure that it's not a fake license, that it has all the watermarks, all of the other trappings of an actual valid license, because people will show a fake license there just like they do at a bar.
And you were explaining to me if flour is...
No, the difference between flour and everything and other stuff, or edibles. Flour is the bud itself, so you have to smoke it in order to ingest it, or use the oil and vape it.
Got it.
All right, so let's go next to Chris from Bridgewater.
Hey, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Hey, how you doing, guys? Thanks
Good.
for taking my call. So I just wanted to, go off of the last comment saying, comparing the alcohol to the cannabis, and there's a huge difference there. So the thing with alcohol is, I hope that I understand that every time you purchase alcohol, it's fully tested and you're getting what you expect to buy. But I believe that all alcohol technically is poison and it's bad for you. So cannabis, the thing is, I think all cannabis should be, when you buy, you should know it's safe. Now, I recently heard that some of the state labs that tested said it was the marijuana was good, and there was no problems with it. But then when a private lab tested it, they found there was like ridiculously high levels of mold and things like that, stuff that you wouldn't want in your marijuana. So I'm just wondering if you've heard anything about that, and if the state labs are going to try to catch more things when they test the marijuana.
I can speak for what it was when I was part of the industry, and I left in spring of 2021. No, the testing was unbelievably stringent, and in fact, you could sort of end up losing an entire harvest because you tested for mold. I mean, as operators, we used to sort of complain that it was a little bit too stringent because you'd get rejected for even the slightest thing. I'm not aware that has changed at all. And I didn't read the story about the private lab, so I'll have to look into that and see what it says. But that is one of the things in the regulations is the stringency of the lab testing, the fact that you could easily get rejected, at least back when I was part of the industry, very easily get rejected, have to resubmit it, and the cost associated with that before you could label it and put it on the shelf, and the labeling had to be completely accurate. So that's interesting that you raised that, Chris. I had not heard that there was some discrepancy between what the state labs were finding and what a private lab found.
Last thing to add is if anybody's curious about that, I forget the name of the lab, but I think it was started with VC. It's an acronym, and they're testing for free now. I know when you used to have to test your own marijuana or cannabis, you'd have to send it like at least 2 grams, and a lot of people didn't want to do that. They're paying $50 for 3.5 grams. So you can send as like little amount as you need to that lab if you could look it up. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the call.
Thanks so much for the call, Chris. Yeah, I have to say, if you're looking at these texts, Andrea, a lot of people are still concerned about the addictive natures of marijuana, what it does to people's brains in the long term.
Those things are going to persist. I mean, I will say this, right? And I say this today in 2023, maybe 20 years from now, maybe they'll find something different in the research. But cannabis has been around forever. And people's views of it are largely shaped around the fact that it was prohibited, and myths persist around the addictive nature of it. The fact that cannabis is used to wean people off of opioids, the fact that opioids take advantage of interstate commerce laws and are trafficked across the country and are prescribed like candy to a great degree still. And people still worry about stuff like cannabis, which is a plant that has been used by indigenous people forever for medicinal and for recreational purposes. It's just going to take a while. Cannabis was illegal for as long as I was alive until it wasn't. So that's what people think when they think about cannabis. I understand the concern, but do the research and you'll figure out that there's less to be concerned about than you think.
And of course, all the same can be said for alcohol as well.
Alcohol kills people.
and it can be very addictive. Let's talk to Ellen in Hingham. Hi, Ellen.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi. I just wanted to touch on exactly what you just said. Alcohol is the most dangerous drug. If you ask any doctor, they would try to wean any one of their patients off of it. It affects every single organ system. It's one of the only drugs you cannot get off of without medical help. You can literally...
Oh. No, it looks like she's still on, but we can't hear her. We can't hear you.
Ellen, you've just dropped out. Say that last part again.
I said if you ask police, it's one of the factors in domestic violence, car crashes. It causes so many problems, but it has been marketed as something separate from a drug. It is 1,000% a drug and a poison, and devastates way more than cannabis ever has.
You get no argument from me, Ellen. She's absolutely right. I mean, it's just, it has to do with how we perceive one thing versus the other. We put a prohibition on alcohol, and the country roiled. That's how they were making gin in their bathtubs and dying from alcohol poisoning. That's how much alcohol is intrinsic to who we are as a people in the world and in this country.
I shouldn't throw this pop quiz on you right now, but how many states across the country now have legalized marijuana in some form? We're still not at a majority, is it?
No, 23, 24. And I don't know the disparity between medical only and medical and recreational. I don't know what the ratio is there.
All right, let's take one more quick call from Chuck in New Hampshire. Hi, Chuck.
All right, Chuck, you're the last up, so make it good.
Hey, how are you, folks? So I was in the industry, and unfortunately, it was a very bad experience for exactly what you were saying before about private equity, okay? We got investors to come in, and to make the longest story short, they thought they were smarter than us, and they muscled us out of the company, took it over, and they are failing miserably. But the other thing that I really want to talk about is legal or homegrown. Homegrown can be wonderful. The problem is what that person is putting in that product.
Right.
You just don't know what kind of fertilizer, what kind of insecticides, because cannabis is very susceptible to insect infestation. And even if the infestation, they don't use chemicals, you're going to have bugs in it, you know? So there's a lot of problems with that. The price, I don't think, is exorbitant. I really don't. And it's not, I'll bet you it's only about 20 or 30% cheaper to get it from the black market, which is not substantial. So there's a lot of reasons to do it. The last person on talking about alcohol being a poison, absolutely 100%. You can't die from cannabis. I mean, you just can't die. And it's a wonderful, wonderful substitute for alcohol. If I'm going to a party now, I may have one martini, a couple hits of some cannabis out of a low-temperature vape, and I still think flower is the best as long as you're using a very low-temperature base. No base, no smoke is going into your lungs. So those are the major points I wanted to make. But especially if you're buying from someone on the street, they're going to tell you what they think it is. Chances are it's not. They're going to tell you what the THC is. They have no idea. Oh, one other thing. Someone said state labs. State labs are labs, okay? Right. The problem with testing cannabis is that you're sending out, I forget how many grams for a 15-pound batch.
Right.
So, of course,
it's a fraction of what, right. That's right.
Well,
that's
Chuck, thank you for the call. We're going to have to leave it at that.
He didn't disappoint. Chuck ended us on a high note with a lot of information, I couldn't agree with him more.
Well, I thought this was all fascinating. This Tucker segment did not go the way I thought, where I thought most people would just be reconciled and fine with the industry as it is, but clearly not. So 5 years is not a long time.
It's going to take some time.
It turns out. By the way, just behind you, Andrea, CNN is reporting that John Eastman has surrendered himself for his arraignment. So
couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
That is happening, and of course, there'll be more that we'll be talking about later this week and later in the show with John King.
That's all the time we've got. Thank you to everybody who called and texted. Coming up after a short break, NBC Sports Boston's Trenny Casey is here with the latest person to come out as a Swiftie. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News.
Your neighborhood, your stories. What matters to you?
Your housing issues, your transportation issues.
What matters to you?
Your economic needs, your information needs.
What matters to you?
Your climate concerns, your safety concerns.
With your help, we want to tell the story of your community.
GBH News 89.7. What matters to you?
Funding for our programs comes from you. And Neville Place Assisted Living in Cambridge, providing residents with wellness, care, and support services designed to help seniors stay sharp, social, and independent. More at nevilleplace.org/care. And the Boston Speakers Series, announcing its upcoming season of 7 evenings featuring Jane Fonda, Van Jones, former Ukraine Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, and Congressman Adam Kinzinger. bostonspeakers.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I'm Jared Bowen here with Andrea Cabral. We're in for Jim and Marjorie all week, and we're live today at the Boston Public Library, streaming on youtube.com/GBH News and facebook.com/GBH News. We're joined now by the dogless, not permanently, just here in the library, the dogless Trenny Casey, anchor reporter for NBC Sports Boston.
Boy, you look like you're mad at me. Like, why didn't you bring Winnie? I was a little rushed today. I ran late. So I was like, oh, Andrea and Jared are in. I should bring Winnie. And then I just didn't get moving fast enough this morning.
Coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Coulda, shoulda.
But I would have wanted her to
Taylor.
stay for the whole show, and I would have had her right here.
Oh,
and
she
then you
would
would have
have-
had to come back and pick her up.
All you need is a bone and some treats, and she'll lay right next to you.
That works for me.
But speaking of Taylor,
You know,
best story of the week.
Bill
maybe.
Belichick is not a guy that, I mean, stoic is probably
Yes.
a word that's often used to describe him. He's got that Gary Cooper kind of thing. This really kind of surprises me that he apparently is a Taylor Swift fan. And here he is, actually, we're going to play a little sound of him actually copping to it, which is kind of
Yes.
interesting.
Saw a little bit of Taylor, and yeah, that was about it.
Did you enjoy it?
Did you get rained out? Were you at that show?
That was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
She
Killed it.
She's tough, man. She just stood out there and played right through it.
I mean, so are you officially be a Swiftie?
No.
Officially, I don't know about that, but well, look, I'm definitely on the. You got to calm down.
Okay, he's a Swiftie.
That's
That's actually a Taylor Swift
You
song.
need to calm down, but we won't quibble with words because Bill actually got it pretty right. Yes. I mean, but isn't that fitting that Bill Belichick, that would be his favorite Taylor Swift
of
song?
course.
Because he wants everyone around him just to calm down and not take things so seriously and not have put so much pressure on him and his team. I just found this, like, every once in a while he, like, shows, like, that he's a human and not a robot. And this was one of the moments, you know? And apparently he's been to a couple of shows. Like, I guess later in the interview, somebody brought up Luke Combs because Luke Combs he played in Gillette as well, and it rained, but he stopped his concert. He shortened it to 90 minutes, whereas Taylor played through the pouring rain.
wrecked her piano and everything.
But Bill did stand up for Luke Combs and said, listen, even when we played football, there was lightning that night. He had to stop. Like, you're not allowed to play through lightning. Like, Luke Combs would have played through if it was just rain. So who knew? Bill, the, like, concert fan at Gillette Stadium.
But can you imagine if, you know, concerts, people go and they're rowdy and they're happy to be there. Can you imagine if all of your fans were Bill Belichick, who's kind of just standing there going,
I do
and
wonder.
not yelling, not screaming.
Like, I do wonder, you know, did he watch from like a box? Because if he would have been down,
I
because if
think
he
he's a
would have been
box
down
guy.
on the floor, like she had this white tent at her concert that was like pretty much like reserved for like VIPs. You could see
Yeah.
it. Mac Jones wasn't in it in Foxborough, but Aaron Rodgers was in the equivalent at MetLife Stadium, and like it's this like cordoned off area, but people can see you. Like they can turn around from the floor seats, they can get video of you. So I imagine Bill watched from like a box somewhere. But I do wonder, like, does all of a sudden is he like, you need to calm down, right? And he's like, is
he
his head
dancing
like
a little?
bobbing? Like,
Yeah.
Does he have like a little white man's overbite, like a little bit of like the forward backward head thing? I don't know. I kind of can see it.
Do you know
I
how
think
much
he's human.
money people would pay for video of that?
Oh my God. I would pay. I would pay to have that. If I could get that video of Bill Belichick, I'd take video of Bill Belichick at any concert doing anything human. Like doing anything that's like, I am not just this person on the side in a cut off hoodie who stands with my arms crossed and is like angry at everybody all the time.
I was going to say he was definitely in a cutoff hoodie at the concert, wasn't he? I mean, he had to have been.
I don't think. Well, actually, I have seen him in button-down shirts before.
Ah,
really?
Like a dress shirt.
Yep.
Like a dress shirt. So I don't know. Maybe he put on like his best dress shirt for the show. I don't know.
He's got to be among her
it was
most
fun to
unusual
know.
fans. I
Most
just have to
unusual
say.
fans,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, speaking of the Patriots.
Yeah, so what's happened? This was tough to watch over the
Yes,
weekend. This was
yes.
scary to watch over the weekend. The constant reminder that we're having, whether it's professional sports or high school, college, these injuries are real, they're serious, and this is happening in preseason.
Yeah. So what happened, what Jared is referring to, in the fourth quarter of a preseason game against the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau on Saturday evening, Isaiah Bolden, rookie cornerback, collided with it's Clint Munson or Clay Munson. Munson is his last name. Calvin
Munson.
Thank you. It was a C and an M. Calvin Munson on the field while going to make a tackle, and he was knocked out. And he was laying motionless for a while on the field. And the NFL and the Patriots and the Packers actually decided to cut the game short. There were 10 minutes remaining in the fourth quarter. The Packers were actually driving. They were 1st and 10 at their own 18, so they had an opportunity to tie the score. But both teams just said, you know what, this is a meaningless game. And the NFL hates when you call it an exhibition game. as they see it, still as a game that's determining rosters. But it really is just an exhibition. They're just out there. They did joint practices all week. They practiced hard for 2 days. Yes, they were running through game scenarios here, but the difference between those practices and this game is that in practices, you pull up before you sack a quarterback. You may pull up before you actually smash into a teammate or tackle a receiver or a running back to the ground. You don't do that in a preseason game. A preseason game is played like a regular game, and so injuries are a factor. It actually prompted the Patriots what I really liked, just to get back to this really quickly, when asked afterwards about why they canceled, part of it was they cited the mental health of the players, right. And that after seeing what happened with Damar Hamlin last year, and just like the emotion of it all, that it's not worth it. This is not a AFC Championship game, as Matthew Slater said. There's nothing on the line here. Who cares if you win or you lose? It's the preseason. It does not matter. So why put guys out there who maybe then in their heads about what they just saw, and then maybe you do something, maybe you pull up short, but that causes somebody else to stop on a dime and they tear an AC, like all those things those mental things factor in. And I was really happy to see people acknowledge that the mental health of players was a big factor in deciding to call that game.
I think that's a good thing too. And I was struck by the fact that, he's a man of few words, but Belichick expounded on stressing this is just the preseason. And then I thought to myself, but if you're a player, even in the preseason, you're always trying to impress the coaches. So you do, even in a preseason game, you give it, they want you to give 100%. But then this happens and it's sort of like, well, now everybody should pull back. It's kind of tough to know.
It is, because if you're a kid like Isaiah Bolden, like if you're Matt Judon, who just signed an extension and is not, he's going to make the team, his roster spot is set, he's in a totally different position than a guy who's on the bubble for a roster spot, or who's a rookie who's trying to prove, you may have drafted me in the fifth, sixth round, but I'm worthy of being a player on your 56-man roster. So it's a catch. Why am I forgetting? 22. Thank you. Hello. I've read the book, I swear. It is a catch-22 for players and the NFL. And I do wonder, so joint practices, guys, have been like all the rage. And then all of a sudden this week, 3 different sets of teams canceled joint practices. And the Patriots cited what happened with Bolden and other injuries. But the other teams were citing the fact that the guys were getting into fights, that they weren't there's a lot of fights that have been breaking out at these joint practices, because it's just sort of like this free-for-all, right? Like you're in a practice, you're fighting for reps, you're fighting for spots, and then emotions boil over, but you're not on a stadium, you're not in a uniform, there might be refs there, but they don't have the same control they have in like a game situation. And so things just boil over. And I do wonder if there's a reckoning coming with how we handle the preseason. And listen, it's never going away because there's too much money at stake. But I do wonder if there is some adjustments that'll be made that make players safer. You can't make them completely safe, but a little bit safer in the preseason.
Well, maybe by just acknowledging, first of all, how dangerous it is. But that's a whole other issue. So let's move on to our happy part of the segment today. Although Taylor Swift
is very
that was pretty good.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the women's soccer, and there's this great piece in the Boston Globe. We've seen how much this resonated around the world, what attendance is like, what the money is like, because money, of course, we know drives so much
everything.
of this. So what does this mean for women's soccer going forward?
Yeah, so the Women's World Cup blasted records again. Worldwide, it set viewing records in Australia and New Zealand. You think, by the way, Australia and New Zealand, no matter where you live in the world, unless you live in the South Pacific, is really difficult to get to. Yet they had attendance records at all of the games. And then the time, even in Europe, the timing of the matches were in the middle of the night, very early morning because of the time difference. And yet it blew away viewing records again. And Spain ended up winning, by the way. We should say that Spain defeated England 1-0 in the Women's World Cup final. They avenged their loss in the European final to England. And now John Powers asks the question. He wrote this really great column in the Boston Globe about where does women's soccer go from here? Because the one team we did not talk about after a while was the U.S. women's team. And listen, they're not going to win everything, right? Every team goes through seasons and phases. But he pointed out that a big difference between these European soccer players and American soccer players, they all play in high-end, like Premier League style soccer in Europe, where a lot of women's players in the United States are playing in the NWSL, which is the National Women's Soccer League. National Women's Soccer League is probably, I would say it's a step above MLS in terms of talent, just because a lot of women's talent in the United States stays and plays for the NWSL, but it is not still as high level as like the women's league in Europe. And he wonders, would it actually be beneficial for more U.S. players to go start playing in these premier leagues in Europe, similar to what the men do, to raise their level of competition, their level of play, and then come back and play for the women's national team? Part of me says if it's going to make the women's national team better, I like that. But then the part of me who wants women's soccer to grow here doesn't want that to happen. Because I don't want women's soccer. I don't want the NWSL. I want the NWSL to become the WNBA, where it is where the best of your best players come to play. And if you're leaving to go overseas, then you're just pillaging the teams here, and then you don't have a premier soccer league here. What I would prefer to see is people to invest in women's soccer here and in professional women's soccer and pay for European players to come play here. Make this league better, because it's already a better league in terms of talent, I think. Bring over those best players and make it advantageous for them to come over here. Invest in women's sports like you invest in men's sports. And it may take a little while to get going, but women's soccer has proved, I think, of all the team sports, to be the one that can go toe-to-toe with the men's game. So invest in it here. That's what I would like to see.
Is this going to be like what we see in the movies every single time there's a Barbie movie and people say, oh, you know what? Women go to the movies. We should make more of those. And then in 5 years, we'll have this discussion just like we did 10 years ago with Bridesmaids. Oh, look at Bridesmaids. Women go to the movies, and then it takes another 5 years.
The institution takes over.
Or sports different, and they're actually paying attention to the economics.
I mean, I think it's probably, unfortunately, like what you're talking about, in large part because the people who are in charge of all of these entities are not women.
That's right.
And so it's like, oh, cute, we had a summer of Taylor and Barbie, yay. And then they're like, okay, let's go back to the big boy movies now next year. Like, this was a nice little one-off, not realizing. And I think this is really, if you're a business person, I think this is not a smart investment strategy. More and more women have high-level degrees and high-level jobs and have money to spend. I have money to spend, but I will spend it on what we're also, I think, conscious consumers. So, I mean, I want to see Oppenheimer. I haven't seen Oppenheimer or Barbie. I don't do a lot of movies in the summer, but I want to see both of them. But I'll tell you what, if I have to choose again, if I have to choose between, I can go to one concert, I can go to Luke Combs, or I can go to Taylor Swift, I'm going to Taylor Swift. Like, women make choices based on, if I can only see Barbie or Oppenheimer, I'm gonna go see Barbie because I want to support a female-centric cast. I want to support a female director. And there's, newsflash, there's more women on the planet than there are men.
Right.
We outnumber you, and now we're starting to out-earn you, so you better start paying attention to us. So if you're gonna invest in something, gentlemen, maybe you should start taking a look at women's soccer, because like tennis, I think those are the two sports that are so similar in styles of play and how things happen that you don't notice a major difference in the product, and you can get people interested in both regardless of the gender of the athlete.
She's Trenny Casey. Thank you for coming to her TED Talk. Yes. That was very good. No, that whole thing was, no. Yeah, I don't disagree and agree fully with every single thing you just said. I think it's fabulous.
It's just the world. I know it's hard, guys, to realize that the world is changing and we're not just sitting at home anymore making you dinner. Like, I probably will still make you dinner because I like to cook. But I'm also going to buy high-end ingredients. So find them sourcefully and in green and with the environment in mind, and I will shop at your store for the meal I make my husband.
I'm very much looking forward to letting you loose on the follow-up soccer story, which is about the soccer. What is he? The soccer chief?
He's like the chief. He's like the CEO of the Spanish soccer team.
On video, kissing a player after the Spanish victory. on the lips. And I not only want you to tell people exactly what he did,
But in
I want
only
you to talk
90
about
seconds.
Oh,
yeah, in 90
okay.
seconds. But also talk about what his reaction was to the blowback.
Okay, so very quickly, so the Spanish women win. It's awesome. It should be noted there was a lot of turmoil with Spanish soccer the last year. Like the U.S. women, they've been fighting for equality in pay, access, facilities, and per usual, the male in charge is like, okay, little ladies, like, nice try. You know, we'll see how you do in these bigger competitions, and maybe we'll invest in you. Well, then they go and they finish runner-up in the European Championships. They win the World Cup. So here's the guy, he's shaking everybody's hand, and he goes in. He's like patting the girls all on like the bottoms, and then he takes one girl's face and he kisses her and slaps her on the butt as she's walking away. To her credit, afterwards, she said, "I didn't enjoy that." And he, of course, like most people, are like, I don't know what's the problem. I was passionate. I was happy. If I offended anyone, I'm sorry.
And
that's not
why
an
there's not any
apology.
investment in women's sports,
Yes.
because that's the attitude.
Yes.
You
Do
did
not
it. You
kiss
did
us.
it in 90 seconds, Trenny.
I
I'm very
can't.
impressed.
Every once in a while, I
It was
can.
the whole Adrian Brody thing all over again with
That's
Halle
right.
Berry.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yep. Aren't
Thank
you
you.
cute, you little girls?
Thanks, Trenny. We've been speaking with Trenny Casey, anchor and reporter for NBC Sports Boston. Coming up after the noon news, our media maven Sue O'Connell makes her triumphant coyote-free return to Boston Public Library. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
You're listening to Boston Public Radio with Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. Just ahead, more smart conversation about what's going on in our community. That's right after an NPR news break, here on GBH News 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And Comcast. Through Project UP, Comcast is committing $1 billion to help provide people with the skills, resources, and opportunities they need to succeed in a digital world. Learn more at comcast.com/projectup. The team investigates the mysterious death of an astronomer during a rare planetary event. Was his demise written in the stars, or was it murder? Watch Death in Paradise tomorrow at 8 on GBH 44.
I'm Diego Lopez, a senior producer for All Things Considered, and you and I are listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you?
CNN's John King. Then we'll open the phone and text lines. As Americans sneak in travel during the last weeks of summer, what's our reputation abroad? Shorts, flip-flops, iced cappuccinos, carving our names into the Coliseum? Are we bad tourists? If you have to ask, yes, we are. It's all next on Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. All but one shelter has closed on Maui as more survivors of last week's devastating wildfires move into hotels or rental homes. NPR's Jennifer Ludden reports that state and federal officials say housing will be paid for into next spring.
Some of the temporary housing is in resort hotels, where federal agencies have set up in ballrooms to provide medicine or clothing and help people sign up for aid. Wildfire survivor Amanda Vieira says simply filling out forms online can be tough because cell phone service is still spotty from fire damage.
There's no Wi-Fi and stuff, and so I have to stand at a certain spot in my room to get internet, which is hard.
Even with aid, though, finding a place to stay is hard in one of the country's most expensive housing markets. Vieira says her sister-in-law recently gave up and moved with her children to Washington State. Jennifer Ludden, NPR News, Maui.
Former President Donald Trump is expected to turn himself in to authorities in Georgia on Thursday. Sam Greenglass of member station WABE reports Trump will be booked at the Fulton County Jail after he was indicted for his alleged efforts to overturn the state's results of the 2020 election.
The day after the first GOP presidential debate, which Trump is skipping, the former president will have his mugshot and fingerprints taken at Fulton County's Rice Street Jail. The sheriff's office says the jail perimeter will be under lockdown once the former president arrives. A judge has signed off on a $200,000 bond, so Trump will be released to await trial on several conditions. One is that he'll be forbidden from intimidating co-defendants or witnesses, including through posts on social media or by reposting others. Trump is one of 19 charged in a sweeping racketeering case. The defendants have until Friday to voluntarily surrender. For NPR News, I'm Sam Greenglass in Atlanta.
The BRICS summit kicked off today in South Africa. The group of emerging economies, including Brazil, Russia, India, and China, are meeting in Johannesburg. Kate Bartlett reports the group is looking to expand.
Some 40 more countries have expressed interest in joining the bloc. And like the current grouping, they include a politically diverse group with democracies like Argentina and autocracies like Iran. But not all the BRICS members are as keen on expansion as others. Russia is spearheading the push for expansion, as because of the war in Ukraine, Russia is increasingly isolated. Another main issue on the agenda will be the bloc's desire to move away from US dollar dominance and to promote more use of its own currencies.
That's Kate Bartlett reporting. On Wall Street, the Dow was down 125 points. This is NPR News in Washington.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. 2 local families got the keys to their new homes in Chatham. Habitat for Humanity has developed more than 180 affordable homes in the region. Habitat's Tara Cronin says the newest homeowners work in healthcare and education.
The most important thing is to qualify for a Habitat home. You already live and work on the Cape, and you have to have, good credit and a good job history. All of our families that I'm aware of ever that have bought a Habitat house all already live and work, and their children go to school on the Cape.
Habitat expects to build homes next year in Dennis, Yarmouth, and Wellfleet. Information on how to apply is at habitatcapecod.org. And former Bristol County Sheriff Thomas Hodgson is once again running Donald Trump's re-election campaign in Massachusetts. Hodgson spent 2 decades as the controversial sheriff in Bristol County before he was voted out last fall by former Attleboro Mayor Paul Heroux. Hodgson first served as Trump's Massachusetts chairman in 2020 for the now 4 times indicted Trump's failed re-election bid. And while in office, he was a big-time vocal supporter of the former president for years, going so far as to volunteer inmates to help build Trump's southern border wall that Trump promised Mexico would pay for. Hodgson also faced accusations of mistreatment of inmates in an immigration detainment facility in Dartmouth that he ran for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, or ICE. In sports, Red Sox Astros play Game 2 of their 4-game series tonight in Houston. Sunny upper 70s today, 72 right now.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Indeed, a hiring platform designed to streamline the hiring process. Indeed works to help businesses attract, interview, and hire candidates in one place. More at Indeed.com/NPR.
I'm Henry Santoro. This is GBH News.
Welcome back to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio. I'm Jared Bowen here with Andrea Cabral. We're in for Jim and Marjorie all week. Hi again, Andrea.
Hello again, Jared. How are you?
I'm great. We are live from the Boston Public Library.
Which one of you is Jim and which one of you is Marjorie this hour?
I think...
Well, this hour, I'm Marjorie.
Okay.
Oh, you are...
I've just decided.
Oh, okay. You've just decided.
Just decided.
Okay. Because I always think of him as Jim.
Oh. Right.
Yeah.
I always think of me as Marjorie, so there you have it.
There you go.
So we're also streaming at youtube.com/GBH News and facebook.com/GBH News. Joining us now at the desk, as you just heard, local woman who survived multiple attempted animal attacks, also known as BPR's media maven, Sue O'Connell. She's co-publisher of Bay Windows and South End News and co-host of NBC 10's Boston at Issue every Sunday at 11:30 following Meet the Press.
Should we have our off the record conversation about Jim and local woman on the air?
Oh no, feel free.
Yeah, no,
Did I just miss this?
No, yeah, you were getting your sandwich.
I was getting my
So
sandwich.
I was joking about how when the Globe did the story about my the coyote pursuing me, it was not an attack. They didn't put my name in the headline. They put local woman. And I had a little tinge. I have to, my ego took a little hit.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, I've been on media since 1978 in this market, and I don't even rate like TV person or news person or O'Connell. I get local woman. And then I immediately thought, boy, if this happened to Browdy, he'd be really ticked off. Right?
Local man.
Local man. He would be really ticked off. And
Cambridge area
Cambridge
man.
area man. And then when I came on and he's been teasing me about it, it shows that he's really would be ticked off if it happened to him.
And he's worried it might happen to him.
Yeah, could be. Local man.
So Sue is tacitly suggesting that we begin as of
Calling
today
him.
to refer to him
As
as either
man.
local man or Cambridge area man. Yeah.
We're in for local man, Jim Rowdy.
All right, Sue. So
All right.
let's pull no punches and start off with a bang.
Yeah.
The Roman Catholic Diocese of Worcester not only expects its transgender students to conduct themselves at school in a manner consistent with their biological sex, they have codified that expectation. Start from the top and tell us what's going on.
Well, a couple of things going on here. I'm always so amused by men in dresses telling children that they can't wear dresses. Okay? I'm always so amused by an organization that is headed by an individual, a man, who wears a dress and ornate shoes. Remember the prior Pope, what was his name? Ratsky? That's what I called him.
Goodness, I'm suddenly forgetting.
Me
that
too.
terrible?
Completely
Yeah,
forgotten.
anyway,
who the
but
prior Pope was.
Prada did his shoes.
Yeah. Yep.
Very, very elegant. The pomp and circumstance of the Catholic Church, and then decreeing, as is their right, and there's certain, everybody could do what they want in their religion and their private schools, but telling these children that they cannot, they have to go by their...
Pope Ratzinger, Joseph Ratzinger.
Yeah, Ratzi, as I call him. Totally telling him, these kids, that they have to adhere by this gender-specific and name-specific. Now, I wonder...
Suppress yourself. For the optics of it.
What if you have a nickname? If you just have a nickname, you're not allowed to use that. What if your name is Leslie and you're a boy? Are you going to get in trouble for that? What if, what if you want to wear a tie and you're a girl? I know that they have uniform codes. It's just outrageous. It's also outrageous to be teaching these children that God loves you the way you are, right?
Right.
And God made you the way you are. And if God made you in a way that you might have one foot in a male world and one foot in a female world when it comes to expression, that's not good. God made a mistake, which is basically what they're telling these children. And they're also, I understand the desire to have conformity in groups where conformity is important to them, and I understand the idea of trying to limit the focus on education. I get that, except they actually exist in the real world, and the message that they're sending these children, of which they are very few. I always like to say there's probably in this entire school maybe one or two kids that might even barely qualify into thinking that they might want to use a different gender or use a different name or use a different bathroom. It's barely happening. And to have this draconian reaction, which of course the Catholic Church is famous for, from men in dresses telling little boys and little girls what they can and cannot do is just ridiculous, outrageous. However, it is their right to do it. I just want to be clear about that.
Well, within the Catholic Church, we've seen this happen in other places like Denver and Nebraska. There's a diocese there that has done this. Worcester is doing it here. Boston isn't yet anyway.
They're thinking about it, though, according to
the article in the
How
Globe,
much
they are.
is this particular Bishop McManus out in Worcester an outlier, especially given some of the comments that Pope Francis has made on LGBTQ issues?
Well, there's a huge civil war that is brewing in the Catholic Church when it comes to the Pope and different areas of belief among the bishops. There's a whole bunch of bishops worldwide who are really conservative and really think that the current Pope is going too far and he's too progressive. And there's a whole bunch of backroom arguments that happen. And I would imagine this bishop would disagree with the Pope regarding the Pope's more open-minded, open-hearted, accepting statements that he has made over his term. And as soon as there's an availability for a new pope, these are the kind of bishops that are going to be pushing a more conservative pope to take his place. So, this culture war business around trans kids especially is exceptionally disgusting because they are among the most vulnerable in our communities. They are the fewest number. There's, in the words of Wanda Sykes, when a drag queen hits your kid on the head with a book, then we'll have a problem. Until then, let's just focus on what the real problems are. And I just think this is a bridge too far for the Worcester bishop here, but I think it does mirror what some people are concerned about. Plus, he gets press, right? So we're talking about it.
Right. At the time when the church is trying to attract people to the church, it is essentially telling, even if they're trying to attract the parents of these kids, they're essentially telling them, you're acceptable, but your children are not. I mean, the contradictions are just myriad in all of this about, to your point, you are as God made you, and God loves you the way God made you, in opposite to sending messages, but you have to be someone that we're comfortable with as human beings as well. Right. And it's just, the whole thing's just incongruous, and it brings me to my next point, which is, while there may be a little bit of distance between these two things, I think that they are related. So there was a store owner, the owner of the Magpie clothing store in San Bernardino in California, who had a pride flag up and on her business, and was approached by a 27-year-old man who ripped it down. She confronted him, not violently. She simply, as far as I know, said, you have to, why are you doing this? And he shot and killed her. Mm-hmm. And the distance between violent, hateful murder and other violent conduct and telling a child you have to not be who you are, and it's not acceptable to adults, is not as big a chasm as people want to think. What do you think?
No, I agree. And again, the language and what we say to people, if I could say the most hateful thing in the world to you, Jared, and I'm pretty sure you wouldn't act on it. Right? But if I say a very terrible, hateful thing, and someone who is mentally ill or in a crisis or desperate or angry or has any myriad of issues that might cause them to take those words to heart and react to it, or if they hear it enough, right? Then you're putting together a recipe for them to take violent action based on what they hear. And this individual, we don't know a lot of information about him yet, but I'm going to bet he shouldn't have had a gun. I'm going to bet he shouldn't have had access to a gun.
It was not registered to him.
Right. So he had a gun that was not his, not registered. He went to this store. This woman, Laura Ann Carlton, was a pillar of her community. Right? She is the person who you would want in your community. She was married, she had kids, she brought in, whenever there was a flood, she would bring people into the store and take care of them. She was the first to volunteer. She won awards and recognition from all sorts of groups for being an ally. She is the epitome, I think, of what we all like to think of ourselves as being, an ally to underserved populations or populations in distress, whether it's just our neighbor who's flooded out or a larger community. And she flew a pride flag, which, by the way, is not a heavy lift.
Many
right?
pride flags, we'll point out, because many others were taken down.
Take them down, and she'd go out and put it up and, be supportive in her community for everyone. And that was her signal that she was accepting. And this poor sole individual shows up with a weapon he shouldn't have, upset by things he probably heard, and has an interaction with her, and she's been described as brave and tough and all those things. So I'm sure she told him to take a hike, and he shot and killed her. And this is just, to your point, Andrea, this is just a microcosm of where we are today, right? People are not being shot for having pride flags up all around the country, but people are being assaulted for simply having flags up. Flags are being pulled down. Black Lives Matter flags are being pulled down. Stuff's being pulled off lawns. People have access to weapons that they shouldn't. And it's really not just about the LGBTQ flag, but it's about where we are in a nation. And then you look to our religious leaders, like the Catholic Church, what could they be doing to help diminish episodes from like this happening? What could they do to support a business owner who wants to be open and welcoming to everyone? What could they do to a guy, I think he was young, who was in distress, who obviously shouldn't have had access to a weapons? What could the Catholic Church do to help make gun safety a priority for our nation so that we're not mourning more people being killed by senseless violence? What are they doing? They're telling boys they have to use the boys' room and girls they have to use the girls' room. And that's the kind of private parochial education they're paying for in Worcester.
There you have it.
That was Sue's TED Talk.
That's my thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
That's right.
So let's lighten up a little bit and go from just two very difficult circumstances to process to what's being billed, at least by the Washington Post, as the 2023 Women's World Cup being the gayest tournament in history. So here we can see great celebration in what has just happened in the World Cup and who is allowed to participate and who's celebrated for participating.
Yeah, it's been a long road. The number of lesbian identified players and coaches, excuse me, in this World Cup, I think there's 32 teams. There are a lot of gays. I can't even find the number. Over 100 openly LGBTQ folks playing. That means there are certainly more that weren't playing, weren't out playing, and that's because of pressures at home, pressures from their team, pressure from their country of origin, and all that. So you can be sure there were probably about 700 more that didn't go on. I'm exaggerating. I'm making a joke.
Not by that much.
Yeah, but this is really and I heard what Trenny was saying about the WNBA and where women's soccer is in terms of acceptance, and how the World Federation, at least, has been working really hard to give supportive environments to out athletes who have also made, by the way, not just LGBTQ rights part of their mission, but also rights for women. I mean, we only have to look at our own team for the work that they have done to try and bring the money and the equity levels up. So this is a great preview to the Olympics and some of the teams that we're seeing in the future as far as being able to be out and proud for who you are and playing. And I think, the WNBA is also a great model for what we hope to see with women's soccer in the future.
The question is whether it gets translated and gets writ large, where people can actually see it celebrated, and go, well, what am I so upset about?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, who
exactly.
cares?
That's always the sticking point.
And more women, by the way, than men out playing in in the World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw what happened last time with Qatar, and where that was not allowed.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I
Because
mean,
of that
yeah, they were
nation's
taking
policy.
rainbow scarves off people who were accidentally wearing them. I mean, it's ridiculous.
So we're talking to Sue O'Connell. Sue, I find this fascinating because I only recently became aware of this in talking to a friend who's very deeply embedded in the business out in Los Angeles about streaming.
Oh boy.
And we have been talking about shows for a really long time. All of the great shows that are out there. We have seen Hulu and Disney, and you have to have Netflix, and you have to have Amazon Prime. Well, maybe you don't have to have Amazon Prime. That might be the one that you don't have to have.
I get it.
But Max and others, only to learn that these streaming companies have lost billions of dollars.
Yeah. If only Trinity and I tell this joke to each other every time. If only there was a way that we could pay one fee and have all the stations come on our TV. Oh, it was cable.
Right.
Oh, that's right. Oh,
Which
what
we
happened?
hated because we were spending so much money.
Oh, we hate it. Our cable bill is so high. I can't believe it. I only watch one thing on HBO. Why am I paying so much? And now it's like, where can I watch it? Like I when people come up to me and say, where can we watch your show? I say, well, where do you watch things? That's where you can watch it. You have to look for it to watch it. I'm on Peacock, I'm on our live stream, I'm on our web, I'm on our digital. You can watch it. So here's the problem with what's happened with streaming. First of all, hey, the great news, we have a number of voices and constituencies and points of view and stories being told from all sorts of participants across this great world. We're watching Korean shows, we're watching British shows, we're watching shows from Native Americans that are made. I mean, it's just everything. And there's so much of it because we only have the same amount of time to watch it, right? I'm still watching the same amount of TV, which is a lot, that I've been watching since third grade. There are things I can't keep up watching. I watch 6 hours of television a day, some of it not so carefully, but I have no more time, and there are things I'm not watching. So therefore, it's like, and this is the problem with the strike, it's like if the chef who has been feeding you every day for your entire life came out and said, you know what, Andrea, I'm not going to cook anymore. And you said, that's fine, I have a freezer filled with 15 years of food ready to go. That's what's happening. So you've got that, and then you've got the high amount of money that these streaming services, NBC included, paid people like Shonda Rhimes, who deserved it, Ryan Murphy, who deserved it, and a whole bunch of stars who got paid to make these big streaming shows.
So that they could build a business model, essentially.
Made sense, except again, there's only so much money we have, so much time we have, and at some point, if you can't find it, you're going to give up, right? Like when you have a conversation, what shows are you watching? And you say, oh, I'm watching Only Murders in the Building. Great, what's that on? I'm not sure. I can't remember what it's on. And you have a 10-minute conversation trying to figure out how I can find, what was it called? Only Murders in the Building. I'm never going to find it. So it's just this crazy thing that has happened. I mean, I've been very critical of the web in 1994, like saying if we had had a business model for the World Wide Web, things would be a lot different. Instead of just, let's make it free. Let's have everybody have access. And now we still don't know how to make money on the internet. But this issue.
You're not letting me in.
Yeah.
Because I mean, now we're going to have to pay for it.
Right.
Literally.
But
because
there was
we're seeing
no way,
the prices rise.
Yeah, there was no way to have a business model for this because we didn't know what was going to happen.
But I still don't see how this is any different than cable. In the beginning, they were paying people to have cable.
But
Cable was so new.
But there was only a couple of stations.
But wait a minute. But I'm talking about how it was approached generally.
Yeah.
So the notion, it's how you make people adjust, right? So the notion of people paying for television was anathema.
Right.
What do you mean I'm going to have to pay? And the cable company said, well, we got to get them hooked somehow. So let's either pay them or give it to them for free. And that went on for a long period of time. Now your cable bill is like, $200, $300 if you add on a certain number of stations. Streaming is going through those same sort of growing pains, and passing the cost on to the consumer, quite frankly, is time-honored, and I'm surprised they didn't do it sooner.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're starting to figure that they're going to make fewer shows. I mean, which is not a bad thing, although the shows are great. I mean, we're in this really weird, and you can speak to this better, Jared, this weird position where we have exceptional television.
Yeah,
we
it really
have some
is.
of the best programming we've ever had in our whole lives, but we only get it for 7 episodes or 12 episodes.
Which is good. And in fact, most of the time it should be 5 or 6, I think, or maybe even 4 or 5.
Yep, and they still have to get paid, and now there's still so many of them, and it's just.
You also don't have to pay your CEO $570 million a year. I mean, so the crying we're not making a lot of money just bothers me because the stuff at the top is not scrutinized, which is why the strike is happening.
Right, but we're not going to pass a law.
But ultimately, this is what I
that,
find so fascinating: is it's built the same way as cable, but now people aren't paying attention to it because your cable bill, you see the one line item, but nobody's actually piling up all their bills together to realize how much they're paying for Apple and how much they're paying for Hulu and Netflix to realize it's probably gone beyond what their cable bill was.
Right.
Only for us to understand that this is right now an inherently money-losing proposition, which is going to have to correct course at some point. And I think the actors' strike and the writers' strike are going to help correct course because they just can't continue down this path. And so you're right, Sue. I think the quality of our television is going to change, and there certainly will be less of it.
But we have so much we still haven't watched yet. That's the problem. Right. I mean, seriously, Ruby started watching New Girl, which was a broadcast show, and I'm always shocked at how many episodes a season there used to be. 20 episodes a season. That's 24. Like 4 years of, little.
Well, that was back when you only had reruns in the summer. You needed a full season.
Imagine.
You had to have a full season. But I'm totally with the idea that we no longer have to have a Grey's Anatomy length program that's in its like 450th season.
Yeah, but it took
Don't
that
jump
long
the
for
shark.
Ellen Pompeo to get paid as much as she should have. Ellen Pompeo, Everett's own, Ellen Pompeo had to go all the way to the end of that to get the amount of money that she was due from the beginning.
Well, that is a shame.
Yeah.
But I also don't want shows that have outlived their usefulness, good for Succession, for like calling it a day and saying, and that's one of the shows that's so great.
Yeah.
God, I can barely do one show a night, and then
We're just getting warmed up here. We could do a whole podcast just on things we're watching.
We got to catch him up on a bunch of stuff, though.
I know.
Pull the plug.
My Brilliant Friend, that's the one I'm watching right now on HBO.
And loving it.
Or Max, or whatever it's called. Yeah, it's
and loving it.
And they're changing
gorgeous.
the names, too. That's hard.
You can't keep
it's
track.
hard.
So we have a little bit of time left.
Yeah.
We talk about these influencers.
Yeah. How are we protecting what used to be child actors and are now child influencers.
Yeah, as we should be. You know, there's a great book out from the actor that was on iCarly called I'm Glad My Mother Died.
Oh, yeah, she wrote
by,
that book.
I'm trying to look up her name. And it's a tongue-in-cheek book by Jeanette McCurdy is her name. And I read it last year. And, you know, these children, all children that are working children, whether they're on television, whether they're actors, whether they are the children of influencers who really pimp them out to make, it starts innocently enough usually, and then next thing you know, you're demanding content from these people to get the sponsors' money. They can't consent. You know, kids cannot consent. And I worked in the entertainment business for a while, and I used to think that, well, as long as Britney Spears' mother was in the room when she was making that schoolgirl video when she was 15, it was okay. Or as long as so-and-so's mother was in the room when they signed that contract that meant they didn't make any money for the first 5 years of their career, which might have been the only 5 years of their career, it was okay. But through Jeanette McCurdy's book, I've learned that the parents are no more smarter than we are about things, and they're being taken advantage of. And this law in Illinois is to protect children from being exploited, not necessarily on purpose by their parents, but being exploited for money and being put into a situation that they cannot consent to, which is becoming an influencer, and trying to make sure that there are guardrails in place to protect them. There's a large legal community that's really working on this, because when these kids crash and burn, or when their parents decide that making $100,000 off of them is more important than them going to school, it basically ruins their lives. They have money, but it ruins their lives. So
and the parents don't get to keep the money anymore under this new Illinois law.
That it would actually become the money of the children that they can't tap into in order to support their own lifestyles. Of course, the parents sometimes argue, well, we are supporting you and we're making the movies and all this. But I think it's really a crucial, I think we're at a tipping point where minors who cannot legally consent to become performers, however you define that, are going to get more protections to make sure they're not exploited, because it's really terrible. I mean, you know.
Well, anytime you can monetize a child's behavior or their image, somebody is making money off that. And I thought they were a little slow on the uptake, because protections for child actors for film and TV have been in place for a very long time. So I'm glad they've caught up.
Yep.
All right, Sue.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Great TED Talk.
This is my rant, my local woman rant for
By
the
the
day.
way, Elizabeth in Roslindale
Yes.
text, oh my goodness, I love the local woman, Sue
Oh,
O'Connell.
thank you.
You even get a little article in there. It's the local
The
woman.
local. I'm
yes,
the
we have
only
a couple
one.
of folks that just want you to know they think you're awesome.
Thank you. I like that. Thank you very much.
We
I think
think
you two
you're
are
awesome.
awesome.
We think you're awesome, too. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with media maven and proud local woman. We'll add proud to that. Sue O'Connell. She's co-publisher of Bay Windows and the South End News and co-host of NBC 10's Boston at Issue every Sunday at 11:30 following Meet the Press. Coming up, as more migrants arrive here in Massachusetts seeking support and housing, we'll speak with the International Institute of New England's Jeff Thielman and Brice Marcellus, who's seeking political asylum here with his family. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH.
All summer, we're digging into nightlife in Boston.
From the bars and restaurants to the changes in our music scene.
But what we're seeing is where smaller clubs are kind of failing around Boston, they're not really thriving, but opening at least and surviving north of the city especially. Places like in Malden, Melrose, Somerville certainly still has quite a few new clubs around Union Square, places like that.
You can discover that story and more at gbhnews.org/nightlife.
Support for our programs comes from you and Tanglewood and the Boston Symphony Orchestra. A trip to Tanglewood this summer opens a world of possibilities. Official tickets are available at bso.org/Tanglewood. And the Children's Trust, managers of Safe Kids Thrive, helping youth-serving organizations keep kids safe from sexual abuse. Prevention plans at safekidsthrive.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I'm Jared Bowen here with Andrea Cabral. We're live from the Boston Public Library, streaming on youtube.com/GBH News and facebook.com/GBH News. Earlier this month, Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey declared a state of emergency due to increasing numbers of migrant families arriving in Massachusetts in need of shelter and services, putting the federal government on notice that further support and assistance is needed here. In a moment, we'll hear from Jeffrey Thielman, President and CEO of the International Institute of New England, on refugee settlements here and what the state and federal government can do and should be doing right at this moment. But first, we want to hear from Brice Marcellus. He came to the United States in July of last year seeking political asylum from his home country of Haiti. He joins us alongside an interpreter on Zoom. His name is Jean-Emmanuel Duras. Brice, Jean, welcome to Boston Public Radio.
Welcome.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bienvenue. No,
Merci. Merci.
So thanks for having me.
So, Brice, tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and a little bit about your journey here.
Brice, dis-nous à propos de vous-même avec famille ou, dis-nous qui sorte de bail que vous t'es passé pour t'arriver là dans les États-Unis.
Ya, pour m'arriver là, so, moi t'es passé, moi t'es sorti Brésil, de Brésil d'entrée Mexique. De Mexique, moi t'es là et pour me dire dans le processus au fait, m'étais arrivé avec organisation, ok? M'pas d'une ferme tête, m'pas d'une ferme, peut-être pas même t'es dans le processus, yo t'es bon me laisser passer, m'te va rentrer ici.
Okay, I came here to Massachusetts. I was first living in Brazil, then went to Mexico. For Mexico, I waited for the processes, the paperwork to be done to an organization. After organizations, my paperwork was done to an organization, and I came here. I didn't want to come illegally, so I waited until the process for me to come here. So that's the reason why I'm here.
Brice, what were the circumstances that forced you to leave Brazil, go through Mexico, and ultimately come to the United States?
Qui sont des circonstances qui ont été passées dès que tu as quitté Brésil ou quitté Brésil après ça pour venir Mexique, pour venir aux États-Unis?
Ok, raison fait me quitter Brésil, l'aime quitter Haïti, c'est Brésil m'est entré, ok? L'aime entré Brésil, l'aime fait Brésil et que bon, ils ont pas traité moi tellement bien, ok? Et par rapport des racistes ou ensemble de tout là, so ils ont pas traité moi bien, m'était ouais que Brésil c'est pas ton côté m'était quoi abriter, ok? So m'était obligé de quitter Brésil et puis pour m'était qu'à entrer ici.
Okay, when I left Haiti because of economic reason, I left and I migrated to Brazil. What happened in Brazil, there was racism there. So I couldn't stay there. So I decided to come to the United States, going to Mexico to come to the United States for a better life.
How long have you been in the United States?
Combien de temps aux États-Unis?
Moi, no.
I have 1 year.
And how has your process for asylum been going? How is it moving?
Qui j'ai processus là pour aller avec pour joindre asile aux États-Unis. Comment processus là est venu?
Ok, comment processus là est? Et comme moi t'ai déjà contacté un gonzame qui t'ai fait me contacter un avocat et l'aime t'ai contacté un avocat, so il demandé une somme de cop pour moi avec madame non et que bon, pas de possibilité à vraiment et pour me te bailler avant juste pour te ca écrit asile là et de m'envoyer asile là aller et bon, c'est grâce avec un ami tout qui t'ai indiqué me faire monsieur Jérôme, OK? À l'aide de monsieur Jérôme, il vraiment aidé moi. On prend et l'aime t'a expliqué les problèmes non et puis même côté il prend ça en charge pour moi. Il t'a aidé moi et me t'ai ca joindre un morceau ou ensemble de la fin qui pour me t'ai capable bailler avocat, OK, pour t'ai capable aider nous et remplir asile là et voyer l'aller et comme ça et ni moi même ni dame non nous voyer asile non aller. So on attend.
Hey, when I came here, a friend of mine got me in touch with a lawyer for me to actually file the paperwork for asylum. But the problem is like I didn't have enough money. But the friend also got me in touch to someone named Mr. Jerome, who helped me to find a portion of the money for me to actually pay the lawyer so he can actually file the application for us. And we filed the application. We are still waiting
And
for answers.
our last question, Briss, we know that you have a partner, you have 2 children here in the United States. If granted asylum, what would you want to be doing here in the United States?
Dernière question, nous connaissons que ou gon moun nan vie ou ka fait vivre avec ti moun, ou gon madame, ou gon moun qui va faire vivre avec lui. Qui vision ou ta gagné si que ou ta vinn gagner papier ou ta vinn ba ou asile dans pays aux États-Unis. Qui sorte de vision gagné? Qui sont ta aimé faire?
Bon, vision moi c'est continuer à aller à l'école. OK, vision moi c'est aller à l'école. Apprendre 2 ou 3 professions, mais je suis capable de travailler, je suis capable de famille moi parce que depuis que je viens là et je suis capable de dire c'est grâce à M. Jérôme qui t'a aidé moi que un full step, OK, afin que nous capable manger et il était bon nos conseils tout afin que nous capable à l'appliquer pour shelter, OK, et pour nous capable c'est l'état qui paye c'est pour bagage tellement remet pour l'état. On bonne base l'état pas ta aider mais à 100% c'est lui même qui a fait tout bagage c'est mon bagage capable même chaîne qui travaille dame dans chaîne on qui travaille mais problème qui bloqué non c'est problème papier nous pas un travail bon si nous même gain social nous avec travail non on pas quelque bagage nous capable faire OK mais par rapport que nous pas gagner là nous obligé c'est asile n'attend on prend afin que nous gagne c'est à travail et pour nous capable aller à l'école en même temps pour nous travailler pour nous tête non.
My vision, I'm hopeful that I can actually be able to get my paper to actually work and go to school, continue to go to school and learn many professions so I can actually help my family. Mr. Jerome was the one that helped me to get food stamps and as well as other assistance like for me to actually leave. The thing is that like my wife and I, we are both youthful and we would like to work. So I'm glad the government decided to help us out, but I'm not comfortable to be staying under the government help. I would like to actually be the one to do actually myself and my family, and because my wife, she's also young, we can actually work. We would like to the paperwork to be processed fast, so that way we can work in the country and contribute.
Well, Jean-Emmanuel Duras, thank you for the translation. Briss Marcellus, thank you for sharing your story with us here this afternoon. We appreciate it.
Lady merci, est-ce que tu chita pour te partager histoire avec yo? Yo merci en pile.
And welcome. Welcome.
Bienvenue, bienvenue.
OK, c'est moi. Dieu c'est moi pour remercier, OK?
He said I should be the one thanking you guys. Thank you.
Merci. So now we'll turn to Jeffrey Thielman.
So, Jeff, at what point, well, first of all, tell everybody about the International Institute of New England and what your work is, who you work with, how you're funded, that kind of stuff, and then we'll get into your specific connection with Briss.
Sure. So the International Institute of New England is a more than 100-year-old organization that started in Lowell, has offices in Lowell, Boston, and Manchester, New Hampshire. This year, we're on target to serve about 10,000 immigrants and refugees in eastern Massachusetts and in southern New Hampshire. We offer a broad range of services from resettlement to services for unaccompanied children to education programming, largely English, to case management work, to workforce skills training, job placement, and immigration legal services. We're a $20 million organization. About more than 2/3 of that is public money and about 1/3 is private money. So the fellow you saw on the screen and in the interview today, he's being helped by, he mentioned Jerome, one of our case managers at the Boston office of the International Institute. And so our job with this particular family is to welcome them, enroll them in any benefits to which they're eligible, and try to help them along the way as they begin their journey here in New England.
How many people like him are in need right now here in, you're talking about New England. Well, let's talk about New England and we'll focus on what is happening here in Massachusetts specifically.
So it's important to understand that Massachusetts is home to 80,000 people from Haiti. We have the 3rd largest concentration of people outside of Haiti. The largest is Miami, 2nd largest is New York City, 3rd largest is right here in Massachusetts, mostly eastern Massachusetts. And so people are coming from Haiti because of the violence in their homeland, because of the earthquake that happened that destroyed the homeland, because of the political corruption there, and because they have friends and family here and they hear about great opportunities here. So that's why they want to come to this region. Many of the people, the individual you saw interviewed today, just interviewed a few minutes ago, he fled Haiti, went to South America, typical story, migrated to the United States. Pretty heroic when you think about it, to leave Haiti. It's quite a struggle to get out of Haiti, get to South America, fight his way up the coast, up the continent, get to the border of Mexico, cross the border, and come here. So that's the kind of person we want in the workforce here in New England. So I don't know, the numbers are pretty, we're going to see 10,000 people. Right now we've served 4,500 people from Haiti. I don't know the exact numbers for the entire state, but it's growing every day. And as you know, some of those people are not in homes right now, they're living in shelters.
Well, and that's the point of the point, I guess, and the question is how overwhelming would you describe the situation right now, especially as we saw what Governor Healy did recently in declaring a state of emergency with this situation and imploring the federal government to do more?
Well, the governor's declaration was a step in the right direction. She did the right thing, and her staff were working closely with her team at the Office of Refugees and Immigrants and the Department of Health and Human Services and her Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities to try to find solutions. What you always have to think about in this work is that solutions are actually made one individual, one family, one shelter, one neighborhood at a time. So our staff meets with an individual. We try to figure out the best way to solve their problem at that moment. That includes food stamps, it includes enrolling in benefits, it includes a program Massachusetts had through the legislature last year called the Massachusetts Resettlement Support Program that provides some folks with a little bit of money and support for our case managers. So, you know, you got to help people one at a time. And if you think about it that way, one person, one family, one community, one shelter at a time, it's not overwhelming. There's 80 different communities in the Commonwealth that have people who are quote-unquote migrants at this point in time. We have a state that has a lot of goodwill in it. It gets chaotic when people first arrive, no doubt about it. When a hotel is all of a sudden flooded with 80 or 100 or 200 people, in some cases, a community doesn't quite know what to do, but once they get their footing and they talk to groups like us and they talk to the state, they actually can come up with a plan to help people in the shelter.
I'm really glad that you said that because my perception of migration is that there is a fairly steady stream of migrants that come into the country at any given time. There may be spikes at different times, but how we deal with it, how we perceive it, whether or not we perceive it to be an insurmountable problem has much more to do with how it is politicized or made the subject of a culture war. And to some degree, our failure to put permanent infrastructure that is consistently funded from administration to administration in place so that it is just a consistent stream of migrants and not this caravan problem or this influx or this spike. So am I getting that right? That we're not dealing with anything catastrophic except in the sense that it is chaotic in the beginning. You do need services, and if you don't have sustainable, consistent ones, yes, you're going to have to put a lot of money and time into getting that done.
Yeah, you said it perfectly, Andrea. Yeah, that's exactly the situation. It's well, you summarized it exactly how it is. There's a poster in my office. There was a week in 1907 in which 6,700 Irish immigrants came into Boston. Okay, and it was a big thing about how overwhelmed people are. Well, you know, 100 plus years later, they seem to be doing fine, and we seem to be doing fine. So I think you have to understand that without immigration and migration in this area where we're standing, Greater Boston, this would be an economic basket case. I mean, 29% of the city of Boston, where we're sitting right now, was born outside of this city. The higher percentage of people have parents who are born outside of this country, rather. Higher percentage of people are born outside of this country. Their parents were born outside of this country. So we depend on immigration to grow our economy, to grow our culture, to make our city and our community a much better place. So you have to kind of look at it as a momentary crisis, no doubt about it. The governor is responding in the moment by advocating for federal funds, by declaring a state of emergency. The state is asking every group that does this work to think about taking on a shelter. That's a big vertical for an organization that doesn't have any experience with that. So we're kind of talking it over and thinking about whether or not we can do it. That's a conversation, you know, with the board of directors and other people besides just me. And so, you know, all the organizations that serve refugees and immigrants in the state are trying to step up right now. We're all working very hard together. We're sharing best practices and ideas. And we're talking daily with each other about, you know, a shelter in Methuen, a hotel in Methuen, or a hotel in Woburn, or a hotel in Billerica. or a hotel in Framingham, and what you're doing about it. So we're all kind of working together. At the moment, it feels overwhelming. It feels overwhelming to a community because you have town leaders that say, wow, how do we educate these kids? How do we get these people food? But once you kind of settle in and figure out and get a system in place, it'll work. The other thing the governor advocated for is to get the federal government to ease the process of giving people employer authorization documents.
Our own AG, Andrea Campbell, has been asking for that.
Andrea did the same thing. Andrea Campbell, exactly. She did the same thing. So she lobbied Secretary Mayorkas to change the rules so that when you come into the country, as this young man did, he can get an employer authorization document. This guy wants to work.
Yes.
And, he might work 1, 2, 3 jobs.
Right.
Okay, he's going to work pretty hard. I guarantee you that the immigrant stories that you hear and the immigrant grit that you hear all the time, that's very true. There's folks that I know here that work in other places in the city. I just bumped into somebody who works in another place that I frequent for coffee. And so, he's working a couple of jobs, going to school. That's the American story. So this, if you just ease the employer authorization document process a bit, if you made the asylum process, system work better, you'd have more people coming to the country in a faster way. We have built and focused on...
Let me stop and ask you about that.
Yeah.
So what if that doesn't happen? So we've just heard from Briss that he has been here for a year now and would like to be working, would like to be studying, but it hasn't happened yet. We see a higher volume of people coming. We understand that Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, the city has a policy of telling people when they arrive on a bus, if you don't want to be here, if you want to go somewhere else, and they say, well, I'd like to actually go to Massachusetts, the city of New York is sending them here to Massachusetts. We see El Paso, the Democratic mayor in El Paso, Eric Adams, Democratic mayor in El Paso, sending them up north to places like Massachusetts. So there's a lot of shifting right now. So we know there's going to be a higher volume, and we know that those work restrictions have not been eased at the moment, so we'll have a lot of people having to wait a long time to be able to study or work.
That's the problem right there. So there's a couple of challenges that you outlined in your remarks. First of all, if you can't get an employer authorization document, you legally can't work in the United States. And it's a risky bet for an employer to take someone, obviously, in that situation. So that's the first thing. It puts a burden on our social welfare system. It puts a burden on nonprofit organizations. It puts a burden on churches and other groups that are raising money trying to help people who don't have resources or a job. So first thing, that's a federal problem. It has to be addressed at the federal level. And they can do that. And if they solve that problem, we would have less pressure here in this state, and Mayor Adams would have less pressure. The mayor of El Paso would have less pressure as well. So work authorizations, big thing, easy to do. As far as people coming to Massachusetts, there are a lot of municipalities. So it's a little bit different than New York, one municipality handling the problem. It's a lot of different municipalities around the Commonwealth with a lot of different nonprofit organizations and churches that kind of come together to address individual situations as they arise. So it's a little bit different. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it's a little bit different.
I do want to say we should certainly shout out to the way cities and towns in Massachusetts have responded to this, the generosity of the donations, both food and money and clothing and all of those kinds of things. But in the limited amount of time, we only probably have about a minute or so left, I do want you to talk a little bit more about the elusive immigration policy and elusive infrastructure on the part of the federal government, because states actually are not supposed to have to be dealing with this the way it's being dealt with.
Right. So, the problem is that over the past many decades in this country, we have focused on a border protection policy. We haven't focused on a humanitarian welcome or humanitarian protection policy. So that's been the issue. It's been border, border, border. That's how the politics goes, and that's where both parties actually gravitate to, rather than coming up with some compromises. So if you talk to people in different industries who interface with Washington on a regular basis, they want more workers. They want the H-1B, that allows skilled workers to come into the country. They want that number raised. There's a lot of common ground, which if we could all come together on it, if Washington could come together on it, we would have some solutions. So President Biden introduced a pretty reasonable immigration reform package when he first took office. He hasn't, kind of expended a lot of political capital on that. Probably unrealistic to do that right now at this moment in time. But some compromises need to happen to allow people to come into the country and work. We have a shortage of workers. Massachusetts is 100,000 short of workers in this state. Millions of jobs are not filled in the United States of America that could be filled by people who are ready and willing to work.
And the healthcare industry is in crisis.
And we have an aging workforce in New England.
But
right?
we also have a housing crisis.
And we have a housing crisis. We have 200,000.
So you have workers who want the jobs but don't have a place to live.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised. People will find places to live. They'll live in places that I would have lived in college. They would have lived in places that are meet health standards and meet all safety standards, but don't meet the expectations we may have now at this point in our lives. So.
Thank you. That was I'm just talking for me personally. That was incredibly informative. So I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much. Thanks so much. Thank you. Great to be on the show.
We've been speaking with Jeffrey Thielman, President and CEO for the International Institute of New England. Earlier, we heard from Brice Marcellus and his interpreter, Jean-Emmanuel Durance. Coming up after a quick break, our food policy analyst, Corby Kummer, on the latest recall out of Trader Joe's. You're not going to believe this one. And the surprising rise in Metamucil's popularity. You're being regular and listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News. We'll be right back.
A hotter planet means an increased risk of intense wildfires. In some states, National Guard troops help combat those fires.
In 2021, the National Guard spent 172,000 personnel days fighting fires, compared to about 18,000 in 2019.
I'm Elsa Chang. How the National Guard is dealing with the evolving threat of climate change on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Today at 4, here on GBH News 89.7.
Support for GBH comes from you and the Museum of Printing in Haverhill, preserving the rich history of graphic communication from typewriters and presses to computers and copiers. The exhibit From Webster to Wiki, a history of the American dictionary, is now on view. museumofprinting.org. And Landmarks Orchestra, performing a free concert including Beethoven's 7th Symphony and Tchaikovsky's The Sleeping Beauty, Wednesday night at 7 at the DCR Hatch Shell. Learn more at landmarksorchestra.org.
Trusted. Local. News. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I'm Jared Bowen here with Andrea Cabral. We're in for Jim and Marjorie all week. We're live today from the Boston Public Library and streaming on youtube.com/GBH News and facebook.com/GBH News. We're joined now on Zoom by Corby Kummer. Corby is Executive Director of the Food and Society Policy Program at the Aspen Institute, a senior editor at The Atlantic, and a senior lecturer at the Tufts Friedman School of Nutrition, Science, and Policy. Hi, Corby.
Hi, Corby.
Hello. How are you both?
I'm good, except about a week or so ago, I am perusing my social media, and I see that Trader Joe's has a recall on their cheddar broccoli soup because it's got insects in it. And then it was within a day or so of that, they were recalling their certain type of almond cookie because it had rocks in it. And now they're recalling other stuff because of metal shavings. Where is Trader Joe's getting its food from? Who's preparing this stuff?
What's going on with their quality control or their public relations? For example, when they were saying that there were rocks in cookies, why couldn't they at least say stone dust? The expensive stuff we use in our driveways. Couldn't they put something, teeny pebbles, instead of rocks in your cookies? And now it's crackers with sunflower and flax seeds and maybe metal. It doesn't say what kind of metal. It doesn't say like shards of knife or something. It just says metal. So maybe they're like metal filings or something, but there's something wrong with their quality control with vendors. One thing they've been very famous for and done very well is having high quality people make their goods and then they repackage them. And unless you know that, for example, Stonyfield Farms is in New Hampshire and there's a New Hampshire manufactured in address on your yogurt, you would not know that it was they. They have very high quality vendors usually, and that's what they've made their name for. But there's something wrong with their quality control with their vendors or when the samples come in that they're these embarrassing recalls.
Which they, yeah, I'm struck by the PR. Normally this would be crisis communications, but everybody just seems to think, oh, that's fine. I remember even last week, when we were 2 weeks ago, when we were talking about this with you, we just got a lot of messages from texters saying, it's okay, we're used to eating bugs and maybe some rocks. I think maybe the metal goes a little bit too far. I guess the PR communication was strong enough to leave out the word shard in relation to metal.
It does. It is true that they kind of, over time, people do get inured to lower quality in their food. But like you, I'm surprised that Trader Joe's, which enjoys such a great reputation, we were talking yesterday about them not using the self-checkout.
And it's great to talk to their cashiers.
Yeah, it's a friendly place, that they wouldn't be more on top of this.
Well, this is the worst kind of uninformed speculation, but they're owned by Aldi, ALDI, the discount chain based in Germany. And they're famous for cutting all kinds of costs so that shoppers can get very cheap rates. And maybe one of the costs is PR. That's just supposition. But they certainly could spend more money on PR.
All right, so Corby, let's move from one very interesting story to another, that Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, ate, well, people want us to believe, she ate magic mushrooms in her recent visit to China, trying to shore up diplomatic relations. What really happened at that dinner? Did she go spiraling out of control in her head?
That's a great story. It's a nothing burger of a story, not a phrase I use, but since mushroom burgers are the great meat substitute, why not use it here? She was in Yunnan, which is famous for a kind of mushroom I am not going to attempt to pronounce, but it means sea hand blue, meaning your hand turns blue if you bruise the flesh of the mushroom, not your own flesh. And that's what the name translates to. When cooked for at least 15 minutes, which these mushrooms were, any kind of psychedelic properties are completely neutralized, and so nobody got high from them. But the interesting hallucinogenic properties of this mushroom are called Lilliputian hallucinations, mean that you see tiny people, the Lilliputians in Gulliver's Travels. And so I love that. I've never seen that before. It's not psilocybin, which is what we all think of with magic mushrooms. The most interesting part of the story is, although it's widely reported that raw mushrooms can have these properties, the actual compound has not been identified, nor did I know that psilocybin was not identified until the 1950s. And so who knows what kind of property will eventually be ascribed to this mushroom. But no, Janet Yellen wasn't sort of slipped a Mickey. Or roofed.
She does report that the dish, however, was quite delicious, and that she did say that she didn't see any Lilliputians, which is kind of unfortunate, because I'd like to see the impact that has on her as Treasury Secretary. Just the image of Janet Yellen, tripping out of her mind would be kind of interesting. But it is part of what this story does talk about is sort of this fear of fungi. People eat portobello mushrooms porcini mushrooms or porcini mushrooms that they recognize, but there is this sort of apprehension around mushrooms for this very reason, right?
I think it's a perfectly good and healthful apprehension. Having been the victim of Giardia, known as beaver fever, in various wild mushroom jaunts more than once. But that's something that is left on the mushroom. It's not inherent in the mushroom itself. I just don't think you should be all that confident unless you're with a skilled mycologist who leads you on searches, and then you're probably absolutely fine. The big difference is in Europe and China, for example. In Europe, foraging for mushrooms is absolutely time-honored. It's a family activity. It's every year. Most families have special hunting areas they will reveal to nobody in their community or on their own land. But someplace, it's a lovely, lovely tradition. But they grow up with it and they're confident, and they're shown by expert guides originally who teach them. The cure usually, unless it's a very poisonous mushroom, is cook it. Just don't eat a raw mushroom. Cook it and you'll be fine.
And don't what was that movie?
No, the HBO series or Max series, The Last of Us?
No, there was another one, the movie with Daniel Day-Lewis, where's that horrible scene with the mushroom. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it's
not my left. Can't be My Left Foot.
It was a movie about the tailor. Anyway.
Oh, the Thread film, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
What is it?
We'll come back to it.
See, now it's going to drive me crazy.
That can fuel the mushroom, the fungi anxiety. But Corby, let's move on to farmers markets. This is a great time, of course. Any time is a great time to go to a farmers market, but especially I think in summer when you see the corn there, you see those great tomatoes and
the
big,
color of everything.
I know the color of everything. The cucumbers, you can taste it just by looking at it. But they're not as popular, I think we're learning, as they could be, or maybe even should be, which is surprising to me because I feel like if I walk by one later in the afternoon, you don't see as much of the produce there, and it seems that they've been raided by farmers market fans. But what's our understanding about the industry of farmers markets?
Well, I have to say, the Globe, which I really admire and love, had a somewhat misleading headline in the story. Farmers markets are struggling. Can they market themselves differently? And it's a University of New Hampshire study that has no statistics about farmers markets struggling. What it does talk about is shoppers' priorities. It has to do with taste. It has to do with price. What they're not so interested in is whether food has been locally grown. And there's not enough of a core audience that really cares about looking a farmer in the eye and saying, how did you grow this? When did you pick it? The stuff that, many of us love about farmers markets. Instead, it was getting a good deal is important, 70%, 89% foods they like to eat. So you hope that the farmers have known to plant something that's going to sell and sell out so that Jared could be disappointed after the show is over, going down the block to the beautiful Copley farmers market. So this study, the suggestions were that farmers markets should spend marketing money on playing up the tastiness, the high quality, and the healthfulness of the food, because the main finding of this study is that's what shoppers want more than caring about locally grown food.
Okay, now see, that makes more sense to me, because as I read the story, I kind of had the same reaction that you did. And that I see the same thing. You see, by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there's literally, very little left on the shelves.
Can you ever get eggs?
I don't buy eggs from a farmer's market.
Well,
no.
I do. Or you go to those little stands and you lift the lid on the cooler, and they're never there because they've already been raided by, I guess, even earlier risers. I always notice that's the first thing to go.
Well, thank you, Corby, because that headline did do us all a disservice. I was very worried for my farmers markets. Now, Jared and I
buy from them. That's the lesson.
Yeah. Jared and I were sitting here talking about whether or not we would eat cell-based meat, which in its description does not sound appetizing. Tell us what cell-based meat is, because we ultimately decided, we think we'd be good customers. Yeah.
Okay. So you take a cell from an animal. I'm pretty sure it's usually a dead animal. So one animal gets slaughtered for the original line of cells. And then you put it in a big brewer, almost like a beer brewer, to multiply and multiply the cells in a growth medium. That growth medium often has been fetal bovine serum, which is often from slaughtered cows before they're to give birth. So that hasn't been very good. There is synthesized growth media now that mimics fetal bovine serum. It's much more expensive, but we hope that that's going to be the industry standard as this goes forward. So these cells are multiplied and multiplied and multiplied in these brewers, and then they're mashed together, and they form meat. It's like a paste. This story is full of it's a really well-reported story by David Abel in the Globe. That ran on the 19th. A really good primer on what this stuff is, how it's made. But it has a sort of boosterish claims. For example, it has diagrams of well-marbled steak. The marbling of fat and meat has not been mimicked yet. It's mostly just a ground paste. More than that, often 90% of something you're sold will be plant-based meat alternative, with 10% of this brewed, incredibly expensive cellular grown meat to give it the authentic flavor of the chicken, the beef, or the fish from which it was taken. The potential is huge. And this guy who's a colleague of mine at Tufts, although in a different department, named David Kaplan, got a $10 million grant from the United States Department of Agriculture to help sales of this, to help the growth of it. to help promote. It's the Tufts University Center for Cell Agriculture. He thinks it's going to change our palates because we can have exactly the variety of animal, mimicked and grown from one animal's cells that pleases us. There was a stunt, a woolly mammoth meatball in Australia made from an extinct animal's DNA, which was available to it. So all of these things have enormous potential. It's just going to be decades before they're affordable.
Well, what I was wondering is what the consumer interest in this is going to be, because I read this story, and perhaps I felt a little bit more deeply than you did for the boosterism, because it did seem that this is inevitable, just the way that AI seemed a remote possibility at one time, and then inevitable, and now it's here. It seems the same for this, that the technology, there's so much investment, we read in this piece as well, in this technology, that they will get there, especially for the fact that it will save the slaughter of real animals. It will address starvation needs around the world. But how do we see consumers coming along with this? Because I was also surprised to learn that people aren't picking up the plant-based food alternatives to meat, like Beyond Burger, as much as I thought they were catching on.
So a couple of things. First of all, it's not really going to solve starvation problems. It's going to solve the fact that any country that advances its standard income, those people want meat. So in China, the appetite for meat grew enormously as the country started to prosper in the past 25 and 30 years and adopted capitalism. India, the same thing. There's been an enormously grown hunger for meat. It's not necessarily going to help starvation needs because there's lots of other forms of protein that can help, but it is going to satisfy this demand without the enormous greenhouse gas emissions of beef especially. So it's much better for the environment. The environment is why Beyond Meat and Impossible began. In theory, the demand is going to be a lot higher for cellular grown meat because it really tastes like meat. And so it's the authentic thing, and you don't have to worry about any kind of substitute. I would argue that the affordability and the availability of plant-based protein is there. It's there now. It's getting better every year. And that's where I think consumers should be concentrating their dollars until these cell-grown meats become affordable and available.
But what about the optics? I mean, if you describe it as, they haven't gotten to the point where they can actually marble it and make it look like a real steak. I mean, what food looks like is very closely tied to, our desire for it, or what we have, the image we have in our mind of what it is that we're eating. How long is it going to take for it to be able to visually mimic what we commonly eat now?
Yeah, you don't want to be ordering yours. I'll take my steak medium paste.
Yeah, that's that's not a deal sweetener.
No, and I think it's going to be years and years. There's definitely already, I know, chicken skin and animal fat that can be brewed in like separate brewers. How they get put together and sculpted, I don't know. Whether that's going to be appealing. I do know that Beyond Meat, and I'm sure Impossible is working on it, already have steak tips in which they're making it seem like there's some gristle in it. They're making it much more visually appealing. It's just much better in general. So this is coming. It's just faster with plant-based meat because the whole industry is so much farther along than cell-based meat.
So I asked Jared this, and we weren't really sure, but is part of the reason that Beyond Meat, the plant-based meat, are they suffering a little bit because it is associated with being vegan or vegetarian versus cell-based meat is you're selling meat to carnivores. Carnivores want to be sold meat. Is there any sort of, accounting for their misfortune in that they're associated with, because they're plant-based, with veganism or vegetarian?
Vegan is the preference that dare not speak its name with plant-based meat alternatives. As it happens, the founders of both named Brown and unrelated, Ethan and Patrick Brown at Impossible, Ethan at Beyond, are both vegans. But they never ever say it because the vegan market is such a teeny tiny sliver. No financial incentive for going after that market. Yes, I think there's some suffering for that, and people don't want an analog food, they want the real thing. And so cellular grown meat can be marketed as the real thing eventually.
So we're talking to food policy expert Corby Kummer. And Corby, it used to be that I think certain generations would have conversations about their fiber and their digestive tracts. But this is moving down the ranks. So we have younger generations very concerned, it turns out, about their fiber intake and making sure everything is kind of just doing its business and flowing the way it's supposed to.
We really never used to talk about regularity.
No,
I can remember when the first commercials even said the word, and it was like, oh my goodness. You know.
With apologies, by the way, to everybody here at the Newsfeed Cafe for what we're going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about.
But it is some of it is colon health too. We've gotten more educated around colon health. So what's with this new Metamucil thing?
You know, there's 100 euphemisms, and it was geritol, prunes, and X-Lax. All of them, you know, television ads when we were growing up, and so giggly and embarrassing because that was something that only the most ancient people would ever talk about, and they were really ready for the old folks home and essentially to be just put down. Now, young people are talking about their regularity and their digestion and their colon health all the time. It's not that unexpected an outgrowth of, for example, gluten tolerance, food allergies. Those are huge topics of conversation. They're absolutely acceptable. People go into restaurants and they talk about their intolerance and what they do and don't want to have. So now they're willing to talk about their digestion and their regularity. And I say euphemisms are always a bad thing. Frank talk is always better. And so I applaud it among young people. Right now, psyllium is having a moment. Psyllium's main product is Metamucil. I cannot believe there's now this young, growing market for something that seemed so inextricably associated with doddering, teetering old people. And now it's young people who are like happily having that awful orange-flavored, awful-tasting stuff that you have to mix with a lot of water for it to work properly and having it at night. But the fact that psyllium grows so easily in India makes it something that generations of Indian people, including several people interviewed in this Priya Krishna story in the New York Times, are, you know, they're imitating their parents and they're saying, I'm doing something good for my digestion before I go to sleep at night. And this is something I should be doing every day. It's taking care of myself. And now I can get ready to relax. One of the 30-year-old data analyzers says, who's pictured in the story.
I don't know. I mean, you don't necessarily have to believe Corby on this. I mean, Shaquille O'Neal is actually hawking Metamucil. I think we have some sound of Shaquille promoting fiber supplements. It's not just for old people anymore, I guess. Oh,
but the majority of my viewers live in America, meaning statistically, you, dear viewer, probably don't get enough fiber. This particular type of fiber supplement claims to help with regularity, appetite, blood sugar, cholesterol, and it's been on the market for a long enough time to have some publicized research backing up those claims.
I apologize. It says Shaquille. I thought it was Shaquille O'Neal. This is someone called Internet Shaquille. Why would you create an Internet Shaquille to promote Metamucil?
I don't know. You get yourself on the radio and it worked.
But in any event, it is sort of related to the notion that we're telling people at younger and younger ages to pay attention to their colon health. So it doesn't, that market seems like it was just waiting to be captured.
And they should. And the fewer euphemisms and talking about it, the better. My favorite aspect of the story was its use in gluten-free baked goods. That it helps bind them. You should excuse the expression. There's a million double-use words. But there's a woman named Connors who has the Bakerita blog from her home in San Diego who uses them for her gluten-free cinnamon rolls and says there's lots of other additives that can help bind and get the good texture that gluten-free flours often don't have, but psyllium is neutral. It doesn't have any bitter or bad after flavor, and it's very useful in gluten-free baking. So that was completely new to me, and I thought, great.
Well, you can also go to your farmer's market and eat your fruits and vegetables.
That is a more natural way to approach it.
Corby,
Thank
it's
you,
great
Corby.
to see you.
We've been speaking with Corby Kummer. He's Executive Director of the Food and Society Policy Program at the Aspen Institute, a Senior Editor at The Atlantic, and a Senior Lecturer at the Tufts Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy. Next up, CNN's John King is with us. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
Offering cybersecurity, internet, and mobile solutions. Comcast Business, powering possibilities. Restrictions apply. Comcast Business, internet required.
And the Boston Speakers Series, announcing its upcoming season at Symphony Hall for 7 evenings, featuring Jane Fonda, Van Jones, former Ukraine Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, and Dr. Laurie Santos of the Happiness Lab. Info at bostonspeakers.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I'm Jared Bowen here with Andrea Cabral. We're joined now on Zoom by CNN's John King, Chief National Correspondent behind the new reporting project All Over the Map with John King. I have been waiting all day to talk to you, John. So much happening. Good to see you.
Hi, John.
Andrea and Jared, how are you? Busy week. We got the first Republican debate. We got a lot of court action. It's a great week. Great week to cover politics.
But the circumstances of this, John, that we have a former president who is likely to get the Republican nomination under indictment, having to surrender on Thursday, is skipping the debate, and then you have these other folks who want to run participating in this debate. I don't even know how you cover something like this. I'm genuinely curious. This breaks every convention, every rational approach to the way we do campaigns and elections. How are you seeing this? How are you perceiving the best way to bring this to the American people will be?
I think you just described sort of the big picture quite perfectly, Andrea, in the sense that this is the next chapter in the fracturing of our politics, the throwing out of the old norms, right? I've been doing this in my 10th presidential campaign. You would think the quote unquote front runner would feel an obligation to be there on center stage to prove hey, I deserve this. And yet, A, he won't do that anyway, and B, all the other legal stuff around him. Look, Donald Trump has turned our world upside down, but let's also remember our politics was in a lot of volatility even before Donald Trump. And so does this help or hurt him? He thinks it helps him. He thinks his position is so dominant that being there might give somebody an opportunity, maybe a Chris Christie, maybe a DeSantis, maybe one of the longer shots found some opening. So Trump's calculation is, I don't need to do this. A lot of traditional political analysts say that might hurt him, that maybe the voters will feel insulted. I don't know if traditional rules apply anymore. We just don't know that in the Trump age. So how do we cover it? We watch these other candidates. There'll be 8 on stage. We see if anybody can break through. Look, you talk to Team Trump, here's their hope, that several of these candidates move up a little bit, that nobody skyrockets, but that several move up a little bit. And so if you have Trump at 40-something, DeSantis around 20, and a whole bunch of people at 6 and 5 and 8 and 4, who benefits? Trump does, just like he did in 2016 with a crowded field. So I think you look at it that way. Does anybody take off? And the next question is, first debate this Wednesday, second debate next month out at the Reagan Library. After that, if you haven't moved into double digits, if you don't see your trajectory going up, there'll be a lot of pressure on a lot of those other candidates to get out. But again, traditionally, you would say, let me get out. In the back of their mind, though, Trump might be on trial once or twice or even 3 times next year. So do you try to stay in longer thinking, how long have we had this conversation about, is there something that's going to cause Trump to implode? We've had that conversation since 2015. But try to tell a politician with an ego, as long as they can raise money, some of them might want to stay in. So that's a long answer because we're in such uncertain, uncharted territory, which makes it fascinating and also confusing.
But do you allow, he's going to do this interview with Tucker Carlson, where he is disdaining the traditional forum where you are answerable to the viewer and the potential voter, and going to Tucker Carlson, which is a more comfortable audience. Do you cover that?
I think you cover it, but it's how you cover it. And again, we've all learned lessons in the Trump age as well, that the spectacle of Trump We have to be more careful now. We should be more careful in our business. And again, I defend a lot of the 2016 stuff against criticism that we gave too much Trump coverage. He was a phenomenon. He launched a hostile takeover of the Republican Party, and he succeeded. He won the presidency. So that's news, and we cover news. But I do think, to your point, the debate is the event, and Donald Trump is trying to have a big little bonfire over here to get us to turn our attention. How John King answers this and how WGBH answers this might be different from how a lot of the conservative MAGA ecosphere that has its own media silo, if you will. But I think we cover it if it's news. Does he say anything new? Does he say anything interesting? Does he have a new policy proposal? Yes, he's going to criticize all his rivals. Treat it as news, but do not ignore the event. The event is part of the process, and we should respect the debate process and the primary process and the caucus process. And if he says something newsworthy, bring it into the coverage. If he's just throwing out random neuron firings, which he does quite a bit, ignore it. But he knows even if it doesn't get much mainstream media attention, he will get a lot of attention in the silos and in the communication places where he's trying to reach his people.
So this is what I'm trying to reconcile is his, I think, really brilliant marketing this week. So here you have the debate on Wednesday that all of his opponents, or many of his opponents, will be participating in. There are several who didn't make the cut. So there's maybe a few hours of headlines coming out of that, and then there's the Tucker Carlson interview, and then there's his arraignment, possible mugshot, and fingerprinting coming out of Georgia, and the debate is forgotten immediately. We know how the news cycle moves. He knew this. He did this very shrewdly. He chose to show up on Thursday, not today, before the debate.
You're absolutely right. It's cynical in some ways, but he knows how to craft news coverage. He knows how to time things. He has a lot of experience at this. So, again, in the upside down world of Donald Trump, what most of us would consider to be bad news has actually helped him solidify his position in the Republican primary in the short term, at least. Is there some cumulative moment where even a Trump voter who wants to be with him in the back of their mind says, I don't know if he can win in November? That's one of the things we're watching for. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this voter project. We spent a lot of time with hardcore Trump supporters just waiting to see if anything will make them waver over time. That's part of it. But you're absolutely right, Jared. He will, by the end of the week, it'll be about the arrest. He calls it the arrest, the arraignment or the processing of Donald Trump on criminal charges for the fourth time. That's amazing. That a former president for the fourth time. So in the day-to-day, hour-to-hour, he knows how to sort of set the tone. Again, especially, we have to remember how much our business is fractured. Right, this is not 20 years ago where there's 3 cable networks and, you either get your news on a, all news radio station or through public radio or public television. Forget about that, right? Every day our business is changing. But yes, he will dominate the discussion this week. And he thinks that when he dominates the discussion, he wins, even if a lot of the discussion is not favorable to him. Does that sustain itself through another presidential cycle? That's one of my questions. And I don't want to even try to write. I don't want to write the second chapter of this book yet. We're early in this book, so the one thing I tell myself is never try to guess what the final chapter is. And I think we should all learn the lesson of let's just take this one day at a time and watch it play out.
The fact that we're even having a discussion about him being a viable presidential candidate with nearly 100 separate charges against him in 4 separate indictments is gobsmacking to me, and I can't wrap my head around it. But for the moment, let's take a look at this stage of 8. This group of people who are alternately, well, with the exception of 2 of them, Asa Hutchinson and Chris Christie, the other 6, sort of chasing Donald Trump, making a little bit of distance, but really at great pains not to offend his base. How do you size them up, all 8 of them? In particular, Vivek Ramaswamy, who has never run for anything in his life and decides the first thing he's going to run for, he's qualified to be president of the United States. God, grant me the confidence of a mediocre individual who just says, yep, I can do that job. It's astonishing.
I'm starting pitching for the Red Sox tonight. I've never pitched from the beginning.
Exactly.
Here I come. Yeah, and good luck to everybody. Look, the Ramaswamy phenomenon is partly born of Fox and Fox Business especially. He's a very frequent guest and has been for years on Fox Business and that. It also tells me, again, how did Donald Trump win? One of the things we have to always remember is not just about Trump, but how did we get to Trump? right? It's the disconnect, the disaffection, just the disgust and disdain many people out in America have for politicians, have for institutions like the one we work in, for the big banks, for government and all that. So Ramaswamy presents himself as an outsider like Trump. He talks very much like Trump. He has a lot of policy ideas. He contradicts himself quite frequently if you look at what he says today versus what he said months ago. And if he continues to rise in the polls, that will play itself out. You already see in some conservative media who may or may not be thinking they prefer another candidate coming after him. But Fox is giving Ramaswamy a ton of attention, not just as a guest on its program, but now in their news coverage as well, which is a shift in the race because they started off as big DeSantis fans. And you can see they're starting to think, DeSantis maybe has lost some juice. So my take about this is all of these candidates are looking for a breakout moment. You're absolutely right. It's Governor Hutchinson and even more so Governor Christie who are willing to say, not only should it not be Trump as our nominee, but Trump should not be eligible. Trump should be disqualified. He's not, he's unethical. There's enough to these charges, even though he's innocent until proven guilty, that we as a party should say we cannot do this. That's a minority opinion in the Republican Party right now. Can they make it more of an opinion? Do any of the other candidates decide to be more aggressive? DeSantis says we can't have the distraction of Donald Trump. He won't say Donald Trump's not qualified. Donald Trump should step aside. One of the things you watch for in the debate is do any of these candidates use the debate and the big audience to reboot their strategy, to try a different approach to Donald Trump? I'm skeptical, but that's one of the things I'm watching for.
Can we pause for a moment with the GOP strategy and move over to the Biden-Harris campaign? What do they do in this time where Donald Trump is campaigning by putting himself on television, whether he wants to be or not, but using it, and having these debates where you see these candidates kind of floundering around on stage, we assume is going to happen to some degree, if very few of them are going to attack Donald Trump front on. How do they use this moment? How do they campaign in this moment?
I think that's a great question, Jared. On the one hand, Democrats say, we'll wait till the general election. But President Biden has very significant political weaknesses. If you look at his approval rating, a lot of Democrats say, why hasn't it gone up as the inflation news gets better? Why hasn't it gone up after months and months of largely, there are still some blips, but largely positive economic news? Why doesn't he get more credit for Ukraine? A lot of Democrats ask these questions, but the numbers are the numbers. And if you're set the Republicans aside, set the Trump thing aside for a minute, if you're just an incumbent president running for re-election and you look at Joe Biden's numbers, the warning signs are going off. Those are tough numbers. They're terrible numbers in many ways. So what do? On the one hand, they're going to say all those Republicans are nuts. That's what they're going to say in their view. When the Republicans talk about abortion, when they talk about climate, when they talk about other social issues, the Democratic take is going to be that is way outside the mainstream. And the numbers support that argument for the Democrats in many of these cases. So they're going to try to say, especially to suburban Americans and swing voters, look at all of them. Do you see a president there? Do you see somebody who shares your views on the big issues? But the other challenge, Jared and Andrea, is they have to shore up Biden's numbers. So you're starting to see the Biden-Harris campaign, the president's traveling more. The vice president is traveling even more than the president, trying to go into the black communities, saying, we need you to turn out. We need you to understand. We get it. Inflation has sucked for you. Forgive my language. The pandemic and then inflation, we understand. It's been a 2x4 to your head, but the president's on your side. They're starting to run some state-specific campaign ads, a Wisconsin ad right now. Look at your electoral map. You understand how important Wisconsin is. So they have the luxury to pay attention. What will they learn from Robert Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson? They are not going to be the Democratic nominee. The president is not in trouble of somebody taking the nomination, but they do have to watch that to see, is there some anxiousness, some disaffection within their own party? Watch that. But the main thing is think about a general election against a Trump or against one of those other people on that stage. And what are your strengths? Try to build them now. And what are your weaknesses? Especially deal with that. What are your weaknesses now? And try to fill in those holes, if you will. And they are starting to spend some serious money to get about that.
How's Georgia playing right now with the indictment news unfolding? How are voters reading this?
That is a great question. I can't tell you how voters read it. I will tell you that one of the most interesting things to me as you watch this play out is the very popular, just reelected governor of Georgia, a Republican, Brian Kemp, is in Trump's face, if you will. When Trump criticizes, Kemp is not saying, I agree with Fani Willis for bringing all these charges against not only Trump, but, 15 or 16 other people. Kemp's not getting into that. But he is saying, don't you dare question my state. We run good elections. We counted the votes. You lost. And don't challenge that. And I think that, in the sense of a Georgia, if you're Joe Biden and you want to win Georgia again, that's helpful. Because you have a very popular Republican governor saying, stop criticizing the system. The system works. You had a right for a recount. You had a right to go to court. You lost, you lost, you lost, you lost. We do things right here. So that dynamic is interesting to me as you go state by state. And now we're trying to figure out the nominees. And this Republican race is interesting. But when you get to the general election and you're looking at how do you get to 270, Brian Kemp telling Donald Trump, shut up, you lost, helps Joe Biden.
I'm glad you raised the issue of the sort of third-party candidates, the no labels, and people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema kind of attaching themselves to these independent third parties. So recently it was reported that RFK has begun hiring Republicans for his Democratic campaign, or third-party I guess he might be running as a Democrat, but he's considered to be almost a third-party candidate. Where do you see the fallout from this? Because to me, it's just a spoiler campaign. I can't bring myself to see it as anything other than that. But do you see it gaining any sort of traction in a meaningful way?
I think that is something we need to spend a lot of time watching. The no labels thing so far is a lot of people talking, and they have to get ballot access, which is difficult. You have to go back to like the Ross Perot effort when he had to spend a lot of his own money back in 1992 to get on the ballot. Is no labels ready to do that? I would also say do not forget, Cornel West, where you have, a very popular progressive a black man who, if he's on the ballot for one or two of the parties that already have ballot access, the Green Party and some of the progressive parties, if he is their candidate, I was just talking about the ads in Wisconsin. Joe Biden needs to have overwhelming turnout and success, percentage of votes in the African-American community, whether that's in Milwaukee, whether that's in Atlanta, whether if you're trying to put North Carolina in play in many places there, whether that's in Philadelphia. And so it is a possibility. And I think we just have to think of it as a possibility now, but don't take, the main ball is the Republicans and the Democrats, but don't take your eye off that, because think about how close the last several presidential elections have been, especially the Trump elections, Hillary Clinton, and then the Joe Biden election. They're very, very close. 75,000 votes, 100,000 votes in 4 states. Could have flipped either one of those races. It doesn't have to be a viable to win third-party candidate. If there is a candidate who can draw 2, 3, 4% from one of the leading candidates, draws more from one. If you're drawing more from the Democrat or more from the Republican, and you're getting 3 or 4 or 5%, you can flip one of those swing states. So obviously, the first question is who are the major party nominees. But then I think you do need to. We will need to spend a lot of attention on this, and not just who the candidates are, but do the parties that they are running with, do they actually get ballot access in the states that matter most?
John King, going back to the Biden strategy for a moment, when does the president begin addressing the indictments head on, naming them?
His posture right now is to stay out of that and let the system play out. I think if you are a general election candidate and Trump is the nominee, then it gets pretty hard. You don't have to address the specifics of the charges, but you can just say, really, you want this as president of the United States with all the, the controversy and what Biden will call baggage that comes with it. Their approach right now, though, is that, he has said he will not touch the Justice Department. The Justice Department is independent. It will do what it does. If you're the president of the United States, you don't want to be saying, I agree or disagree with a county prosecutor in Georgia or a county prosecutor in New York, where the other 2 state cases are. Cases are. And he also has the other complication, Jared, is with the special counsel now investigating Hunter Biden, the president of the United States might end up being a witness, might end up being interviewed as part of that investigation. So the smartest approach for him is hands off. And obviously inside the White House, they wish the Hunter thing was long gone, but they're not going to get that wish. The Hunter Biden investigation, whatever you think of it as you listen, is most likely with this president at least deep into the campaign year, next year, and throughout.
And so what do you think about Kamala Harris? Do you think that she and Biden campaign separately but together, if you know what I mean? Where there's an establishment of her candidacy as vice president as a somewhat separate thing to Biden's?
I think that's a great question in the sense that, the president, Joe Biden, has been vice president. So he understands that there are, a lot of the coverage of any vice president, some of it's I find interesting and legitimate. Some of it is we're in a slow season in politics and there's nothing to do, so we cover the vice presidents. It's a thankless job. It just is. Whether you're Kamala Harris now, Joe Biden in the Obama days, Dick Cheney in the Bush days, Al Gore in the Clinton days, we can go back and back, George H.W. Bush in the Reagan days. We can go. It's a thankless thing. However, she becomes increasingly important for a couple of reasons. Number one, because of the president's age, Republicans are going to run saying, you're voting for Harris. You're voting for Harris. Do you want a Harris presidency? They believe, and some of this is just as it's a woman and a black woman, right? So they just think that they can swing some people their way just with that. That's a fact. And so Biden has to show, A, he will show solidarity because he remembers being in that job. B, I think they will be together sometimes when it makes sense to show that picture. But other times, she is fascinating to me in the sense that, for all the criticism, so I always say, do they grow? Right? That's how I cover politics, and some of the criticism about her, staff turmoil, some of her performances is legitimate, very well sourced. If you go back and read some of those pieces, okay, she knows that. So does she grow? A lot of more recent reviews are more positive, but in terms of turning out women, targeting the suburbs, making sure the traditional Democratic constituency in the African American community turns out, she's a vital asset.
And the abortion issue.
And the abortion issue. Their success in a very close election, their success, I do believe, especially on the Democratic side, we always say the vice president doesn't matter. People vote for president. And that is true. People are voting for a president. But I would posit the question of, will this be the election where that role, because of her ability to touch the constituencies that matter most for the Democrats, and the fact that the Republicans are going to be attacking her from day one, they already are. Wait till we get to the general election. That this may be the campaign where that job, the number two, especially on the Democratic side, is more important than it's ever been.
John, it's always so great to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
Take care, guys. Appreciate it.
We've been speaking with CNN's John King, chief national correspondent, behind the new reporting project All Over the Map with John King. Coming up, a Boston couple made headlines after their dog chewed their passport days before an Italian wedding and honeymoon. But was Little Chickie just doing their part to address the onslaught of unruly American tourists in Europe? I hope so. We'll take your calls and texts next on Tourists Gone Wild. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
For thrill seekers, what's more fun than a roller coaster? But recently, riders in Wisconsin were stuck upside down for hours after a mechanical failure. Another spotted a huge crack in a supporting beam of a North Carolina coaster after his family had been on the ride.
I'm not an engineer, but that's not good.
America's roller coasters, next time on 1A.
This afternoon at 2, here on GBH News 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you and the University of Massachusetts Amherst, dedicated to generating new knowledge and applying discoveries to the betterment of society. You can learn more about research, innovation, and economic impact for the Commonwealth at umass.edu. And the Museum of Science, The Journey to Mars, starts here. You can experience all things Mars, online and in person. The journey begins at mos.org/Mars.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I'm Jared Bowen here with Andrea Cabral. We're in for Jim and Marjorie all week, and we're live today at the Boston Public Library, as you're probably hearing. Chickie is the name of the 1.5-year-old puppy who landed his owners on Good Morning America, not to mention all of the local news stations, I think, after chewing up pages of a passport just a week away from their wedding trip to Italy. Not they're attending a wedding, but they're actually being married in Italy. Many have painted Chickie as the lovable villain of this story, but was Chickie just trying to protect Europe from the scourge of American tourists behaving badly? Certainly, you've seen the stories this summer, 2 drunk Americans who trespassed into a closed section of the Eiffel Tower and slept off their bender high above Paris, the tourist who filled her water bottle at the Trevi Fountain, or the guy who carved his name into the side of the Colosseum. Then there are the everyday tiny attacks on foreign customs by American travelers who wear flip-flops, ask for ice, demand that the AC be turned up all the way. Our text lines are open and phone lines are open at 877-301-8970. As Americans sneak in foreign travel during the last weeks of summer, are we bad tourists and is it getting worse? Or are you in the camp of the people who think, forget it, I'm spending a whole lot to travel and I just want things to go the way that I want them to go? UNESCO World Heritage Sites be damned. Again, our number is 877-301-8970 to call or text. We talked about this recently, too, that I think post-COVID, people don't necessarily completely know how to behave now that we're all out in the world together again. And travel is just gone bananas. I think it's partly revenge travel. People spent all this time inside. They saved a lot of money by not traveling during the pandemic. So as I say, it's up by this huge percentage, the number of Americans traveling to Europe this summer and not always doing good things.
Yeah, I think the word I used for it was nearly feral. So we've become nearly feral. But before we jump into Are We Bad Tourists, I do have to let you know that there is someone named William who is watching you on YouTube, and he let us know that you look so handsome today.
Oh, boy.
He says, Jared looks so handsome today, love his shirt, and he got some color on vacation.
Well, I do a lot of running outside, but thank you, William. That's very kind. Let's go back to our issue at hand. Thank you for that, Andrea.
Well, I just thought William should get the shout out because I actually
No,
agree with him.
it's
You
very
do look lovely.
Thank you.
But it is true that there's and they think you look great too.
Thank you. And now Ms. Red is the carpet here.
It's really fun to make you blush. But there has always been, historically, there's been this sort of the ugly American. Like we go to other people's countries and scream, "Why doesn't anybody speak English?" Which is sort of like, well, it could be because that's not their native language.
Because we're in Italy, yeah.
That kind of thing, and then we make light of it in movies. In fact, do we have some sound from National Lampoon's Vacation? I think, which is sort of the quintessential bad American vacation, bad Americans on vacation and behaving badly. This is European Vacation. Let's run that sound.
This country's eons old, kids. That's centuries to you and me. Charming, isn't it?
It looks like Massachusetts.
Limited appreciation for the age of Europe and its many artifacts. But we already sort of come into it with the reputation, and there has been a huge upsurge in just bad behavior among travelers. I mean, airlines are really up against it with the way people are behaving on airplanes, and I don't doubt that behavior continues once people get to wherever they're going.
We are maintaining that reputation. There are people, as we mentioned, climbing into the Trevi Fountain. That may be La Dolce Vita, sent people the wrong message that that's just how you behave on a summer night in Europe, is to just dive into the fountain. That's actually not true. Or throwing your scooter down the Spanish steps and causing $25,000 worth of damage. So we're just not acquitting ourselves very well. Our number is 877-301-8970. Have you had experiences as you've traveled abroad this year and seeing the so-called ugly American?
And by the same token, have you seen
best?
Kindness and generosity? Because we want to hear that. Yeah, we want to hear that too. It doesn't have to be like a total downer of a segment. But are we living up to that reputation, or are we trying to move away from it, is really what we're asking people. And how have your travel experiences been? Has somebody made you miserable? Has someone taken off their shoes on the airplane and put their feet on the footrest, like where you're seated? That has actually happened to me. I've actually had a footless person on a very long flight.
A shoeless person. Hopefully not a footless
Oh yeah,
person.
I said that wrong. Not a footless person, a shoeless person for the majority of the flight, where you just kind of go,
That's revolting.
You have to know you're not in your living room. This can't possibly look like your living room, but it happens.
Well, let's start with Mary in Rhode Island. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, Jared. Hi, Andrea. I'm calling because I can so identify with the story about the two passports. Some years ago, my granddaughter and I were scheduled to fly out of Logan. She was going to Italy, and I was going to Ireland, but we were leaving on the same day on different flights. The morning before we were supposed to go, I came out into the living room, and our puppy was on the couch, and she was chewing something. And I suddenly realized it was my granddaughter's passport. And there was panic. Now, she was going to be allowed to leave the country, but she had to stop over at Heathrow and Heathrow would not accept those two passports. Long story short, she was a week late leaving because they had to get another passport, and I felt terrible leaving that morning without her.
Oh, what a terrible...
She got left behind, right. No, bad things happen to our documents. That does happen.
Yeah, Mary, thank you for that story. It looks like Chickies owners, though, are not going to have the same fate in having to wait because Senator Markey's office has stepped forward, and it sounds like they'll have their new passport issued very quickly so that they can head on to this wedding. And what was I saying this morning? Now that they've been on Good Morning America, you know that Oprah's just going to step forward and pay for the whole wedding now.
Right.
So Chickie is the most advantageous dog on the planet.
The best thing that's ever happened to them. No, that's true. That's like a whole part of the discussion is like, people are saying, oh, how did they get, their passport replaced so quickly? I do think there's a difference between getting a fresh passport when we have one that is valid but has been damaged versus saying, hey, I forgot to get my passport and I'm traveling in 20 minutes. Can I get a new passport? I think that's a difference, but still, most of us would not be able to even get a refurbished passport in that time.
Very charitable of you, I would add.
I know. It's the end of the show, so I'm feeling like I should be kind of nice.
Yeah, you are sounding kind of nice. We have a texter saying, and this is Greg, I believe the tourist who carved names into the Colosseum was from Britain. We tried to be careful to not say that was an American, but it seems the ugly American syndrome is being exported right now. So we don't have a complete lock on this. Although we do have a number of people writing, like Judy from Watertown. In 1967, as a student in Europe, I knew enough when asked where I was from to say Canada. Good strategy.
There are a fair number of Americans that actually will do that when they're traveling, depending on where they're going. They just feel like it's safer because, nobody hates Canadians.
And you don't want judgment, right. Let's go to Henry in Rhode Island.
Hi, Henry.
Hello, this is Sven.
Oh, hi, Sven.
Oh, hey, how are you? So I'm not sure if the American tourist has gotten worse, but I'd also say that they haven't been great for a long time. About 35 years ago, I was in Italy and with a very close friend, and we were in a long line at the bank and exchanging money. As you know, those days you had to do it sort of in the bank. And as we were sitting there, you could see at the beginning of the line, this person was getting more and more flustered and louder and more flustered and louder. And suddenly, in sort of a burst, as she couldn't understand the Italian from the teller, she turns around and screams, "Doesn't anybody speak American here?" Whereupon the two of us crawled out the back door. We didn't say we were from Canada, but we crawled out the back door. So I'm not sure it's gotten a whole lot worse. I just think the arrogance of most Americans think they're better than most people, so they're ready to be louder.
It's true.
Yeah.
It is. It's a good point. I mean, we're the only, probably the only country that has a championship baseball game that only involves teams from America and calls it the World Series.
It's so weird that you're saying this because I was trying to think of one experience I had. I was years ago touring the Waterford Crystal Factory in Ireland, and I think they make some version of the Super Bowl trophy. And we were on this tour, and there was this person from Massachusetts. I did not know this person. I think maybe even wearing a Patriot sweater. And when they pointed this out, "Go Patriots!" and he just screams this in the middle of the tour, and all of these tourists turn around. They had no idea what he was talking about, and I think I turned bright red again, even though nobody would ever know that I was coming from Massachusetts. But there is a hometown pride that we have.
There is a hometown pride that we have. It's just, I think, believing that the world only goes as far as we can see versus what the rest of the world can see, and that's a bit of a problem. Let's talk to Bruce in Fitchburg. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Bruce.
Hi. I've lived overseas for like 12 years, and so I have a little bit of perspective on this. I think it's more of a familiarity breeds contempt syndrome. I was looking in the New York Times, and they were saying the same thing about Spaniards and Brits. There's like quarter of Britain goes to Spain every year, and the Spaniards are tired of them. And, so I won't say that there's no truth to that generalization about Americans. I think the fact that we're a monosyllabic or a monolinguistic culture has a lot to do with it. because anybody in Europe speaks like 2, 3, 4 languages.
Right.
And so I think that's a big part of it. But I don't think we're any worse than anybody else. We're just there more.
The French certainly
I
do
think
have
that's a
that
very good
reputation. Yeah, that they don't really want to tolerate if you don't speak French well or speak it in an intelligible way. They do tend to just kind of laugh and keep it moving.
I can counter that because I was in Paris earlier this year, and everybody was completely lovely and friendly and welcoming, and I'm sure my 4 years of high school French did not serve me well, and they were still very patient with me, and I thought this belies all of the stereotypes that we have harbored about the French and Parisians in particular.
Well, it's
for
probably
decades.
because they have that reputation in this country because that's the way we portray them in movies.
Right, exactly. And so much of this comes from movies. But listen to some of the things that people have done. A Czech tourist sunbathing topless on a war memorial. People swimming through the Grand Canal, which, by the way, is basically a wastewater system in Venice. As I mentioned earlier, people throwing their scooters down the Spanish Steps in Italy and costing $25,000 worth the damage. People just don't know how to behave. And a lot of this, and I think you and I were talking about recently, people throwing things at performers on stage.
Right.
I think a lot of this is born out of people trying to create their own Instagram or TikTok or social media moments so they can get a little degree of fame out of the things they're doing.
Yeah, we really shouldn't discount people's desire to record themselves doing untoward, unsavory, or just downright stupid things for the purpose of getting other people to watch them do those untoward, unsavory, downright stupid things. That's where we are. That's exactly where we are.
And at the end of the day, of course, it's evidence when you do those things and you get hauled into court.
And that amazes me that people never seem to get that. It's like if I'm watching you on Twitter, a bunch of other people are watching you too, some of whom are in law enforcement. So,
all right, let's go to Dan calling from the Pike. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Dan.
So I took, on the last day of school, I took my 2 boys and my wife, and we went to Italy this year. It was storybook. It was perfect. It was great. And the entire time I said, guys, we are flying under the radar. We are not going to be, quote, those Americans. And we just let people, it was the greatest teaching/learning experience for them. It was phenomenal. Every stereotype is true. Americans are ugly. Europeans are beautiful and smart. I could keep going on and on and on.
Well, that's nice. We're ending this in a good way.
That's right.
Yeah, it was great. Like in Italy, what I'm telling all my friends, you got to bring your A game. Everyone is beautiful. No one wears like a concert T-shirt or Budweiser. There's no ads. It's you got to bring your A game. Yeah.
Well, it is the birthplace of a million unbelievable fashion designers. It's probably a standard that they have to meet. But that's great that you went and you had such a really great trip. I mean, we do want to hear like some of the really positive things, and that Americans going abroad and enjoying where they're going and behaving well while they're there.
Dan, and I was struck by the same thing in Paris, walking the Champs-Elysees and seeing how well dressed people were in France, and I just thought, genetically, I'm not equipped to ever dress this way, no matter how many magazines or shows I watch. But it is nice to see that kind of culture thrives. We have Paul from Worcester writing, when I visit my friends in other countries, they tell me to say I'm from Canada. Which is, I guess, kind of a compliment, or trying to help, but not very much of a compliment.
At least you know they're looking out for you.
Exactly.
We also have a texter who says, just to help you understand, it was named the World Series in 1903, not because of American egotism, but because we were the only country to have the sport of baseball. Okay, so why wouldn't you call it the United States Series?
Well, it's all about branding at this point.
Right. I mean, I get that we were the only country to have baseball, but that doesn't mean that other countries will not at some point have baseballs. Please see Japan. And so why would you still just call it the World Series? It still should just be the United States Baseball Championship.
I just ordered my Canada pins on Amazon while we were talking to wear on my jackets and travel going forward.
Pianist Dmitry Alexeyev and the St. Petersburg Philharmonic Orchestra, led by Yuri Tamirkanov, with Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini.
Classical Radio Boston is WCRB-FM 99.5 HD1 Lowell, Boston, WGBH-FM HD2 Boston, WCAI-FM HD2 Woods Hole, WJMF-FM HD1 Smithfield, Providence, and at classical.org.
Just about 2 o'clock Tuesday afternoon, chugging right along through this week. I'm Greg Farisi. Thanks for having me with you. Later on, we'll enjoy violinist Alessandro Tampieri performing Vivaldi's Castello Violin Concerto, also Prokofiev's Classical Symphony a little after 3 today. Right now, Concerto Vocale and conductor Renee Jacobs with the Chaconne Canzone by Cavalli.